Hi guys. Tonight we slip quietly into a world that smells of brine and pine tar, where the boards beneath your feet are slick with frost, and every gust of wind threatens to tear the warmth from your very bones. You stand on the deck of a medieval ship in the dead of winter. Lanterns flicker like fragile stars, the timbers moan, and you are already shivering. You are about to lie down and attempt something nearly impossible, to sleep in these brutal conditions. And let's be honest, if you actually tried, you probably wouldn't survive this. But the story? That will keep you warmer than the crew ever managed. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, leave a comment with your location and the time right now. I'd love to know who's joining me on this midnight voyage. Now, dim the lights and imagine yourself stepping off into the shadows of history. You trudge across a deck rimmed with frost. The ropes are stiff, frozen in place like the limbs of statues. Your breath hovers in the air, and when you lean over the rail, you see black water glittering with icy foam. The sea is endless, cruel, and indifferent to your comfort. Sailors knew this feeling well. They lived it, night after night, with no reprieve. A medieval vessel was not a floating inn. It was a cramped wooden contraption, hammered together with iron spikes, designed to move cargo or men, not to nurture rest. Still, sailors tried. After a day of hauling ropes with hands that blistered, of shouting into wind that never seemed to end, they longed for sleep. And yet, where could you possibly lie down? Beneath your boots, the deck was slick with brine and sleet. Below, the hold was damp, airless, and crammed with barrels of salted fish, sacks of flour, coils of rope. Comfort was a foreign concept here. One mainstream historical fact is clear. Ships of the 13th and 14th centuries had no standardized sleeping quarters for ordinary sailors. Officers might get a small cabin, but the rank and file? They found space wherever they could on planks, near the mast, curled up beside the cargo. And when winter struck, those places turned into refrigerated coffins of air. The quirky tidbit? Sometimes sailors actually preferred to stay on deck, even in freezing weather, because the smell below rotting bilge water mixed with unwashed bodies and spoiled provisions was unbearable. Can you imagine? Choosing the sting of icy wind over a stinking, suffocating hole? Yet many did. Historians still argue whether medieval crews developed clever bedding solutions we simply haven't found in the records. Some suggest mats of rushes, others scraps of sailcloth layered for insulation. Archaeological evidence is scarce, and so we're left piecing together fragments from shipwrecks and sailor songs. But the consensus is stark. Whatever they used, it wasn't enough to banish the cold. You crouch in the darkness and run your hands along the grain of the deck. It is rough, splintered, biting into your palms. Imagine curling your body here, wrapping yourself in a cloak, stiffened by salt spray. The cold doesn't just seep through, it invades, crawling into your bones. Every creak of the hull echoes like a reminder that the sea is watching, waiting. Sleep feels less like a refuge and more like surrender. And yet, sailors did sleep. Not comfortably, not deeply, but enough to stumble through another day of labor. Some whispered prayers before closing their eyes, their words lost beneath the wind. Others muttered curses at the sea, as though swearing at it might bring a shred of warmth. They were, after all, human. Even in misery, they dreamed sometimes of warm hearths back home, sometimes of food, sometimes of nothing but silence. Picture yourself lying here now. The stars above are bright, so bright they seem almost cruel, sparkling in a sky that gives no warmth. Your shipmates shift beside you, their bodies pressed close, because shared heat is better than none. Someone coughs, someone snores. The air reeks of sweat mingled with tar. The sails overhead snap in the wind like angry whips. Your eyelids flutter, heavy, yet every sound keeps you teetering between wakefulness and exhaustion. You may wonder, why didn't they simply light a fire to warm the space? Sailors sometimes tried, in metal braziers, but the risk of setting the ship alight was too great. Most captains forbade open flame below decks. The crew accepted cold as inevitable, the same way they accepted storms or hunger. Their resilience wasn't born of choice, but of necessity. Now, let the image settle in your mind. Frost clinging to ropes, the sting of salt in every breath, men curled like cats against the timber, dreaming of faraway hearths. This is how sleep began on a medieval ship during brutal winter, not with comfort, but with endurance. You climb down the steep, narrow ladder into the ship's belly. The lantern above swings with each tilt of the hull, throwing crooked shadows along planks nailed together with more faith than precision. You duck, because the ceiling beams are so low that even a small misstep cracks your skull. Here, in this cramped wooden hull, men try to close their eyes and forget the misery of endless winter voyages. The first thing you notice is space, or rather, the lack of it. Medieval ships weren't designed with cozy berths for sailors. Unlike later vessels with hammocks strung in neat rows, these ships squeezed every inch for cargo and function. A cog or a carrack of the 14th century might haul tons of wool, salt or wine, but when it came to the men moving it all, the ship's design was brutally indifferent. You slept where you could fit. A mainstream historical fact reveals that most common sailors in Europe at this time had no dedicated bunks. Officers might enjoy a curtained alcove near the stern castle, but ordinary crew curled up against barrels, wedged themselves between coils of rope, or sprawled across bare planking. Privacy? Forget it. You could hear your neighbor breathe, groan, or mutter in his sleep, and you often felt his elbow in your ribs. Now imagine the soundscape: timbers groaning, rats scratching, and water sloshing in the bilge below. With every sway, barrels shift, ropes creak, and the hull seems to sigh like a restless giant. You stretch your legs only to bump against a chest of tools, or worse, the body of another exhausted man. Claustrophobia isn't an exception here. It is the rule. A quirky little tidbit: in some Mediterranean galleys, space was so tight that men sometimes slept right on the benches where they rowed during the day. Their sweat-soaked clothes froze stiff in the night air, so they woke wrapped in their own salty armor. The smell must have been unforgettable. Imagine centuries of sweat caked into timbers never properly scrubbed. No lavender sachets here. Historians still debate whether ships of northern Europe allowed any kind of layered sleeping platforms for sailors, or if they were simply piled into holds like sacks of onions. Some argue that drawings of sleeping quarters on later vessels reflect earlier practices. Others insist that evidence points only to makeshift rest areas. Either way, the consensus is grim. No matter what structure existed, it was narrow, dark, and damp. You shift your weight in this imagined hull. The boards are wet beneath your hands, moisture dripping down the inside planks from condensation. When the sea pounds against the hull, it feels like the whole room trembles. Men cough in the darkness, their chests rattling from cold and salt air. Somewhere, someone mutters a prayer, not for warmth, but simply for the strength to wake at dawn. Your body aches because you're not lying flat, there isn't enough room. Knees tuck up against your chest, arms fold across your belly, and you try to convince yourself that this hunched pose counts as rest. It's not sleep as you know it. It's survival disguised as slumber. The smell is another enemy. Tar, fish, mold, and humanity blend into a thick perfume that clings to every surface. You think of home, where even a pile of straw near the hearth would smell sweeter. That longing makes your eyes sting, but there is no escape. You roll over and face a barrel, its rim worn smooth by countless shoulders brushing past. For a moment, you pretend it's a wall of your own small room ashore. The fantasy lasts just long enough for your bunkmate to sneeze directly in your direction. And yet, people adapted. They learned to shut out noise, smell, and closeness, because the sea demanded it. Sailors knew that complaining solved nothing. A whispered joke, a shared flask of ale, or a muttered curse at the wind might soften the edges, but not for long. Soon enough, the watch bell rang, and you were shaken awake to face another frozen shift. Picture the hull again now. a wooden cage rocking endlessly, crammed with weary bodies pressed close like spoons in a drawer. This was not rest in the way you know it. It was stolen time in a box of splintered planks, a reminder that comfort was a privilege reserved for land. You linger in the dim hold, eyes adjusting to the shadows, and notice something missing, something you might expect to see slung from the beams. Hammocks. They're nowhere to be found. You may picture sailors rocking gently in nets, like cocoons suspended above the floor, but that comfort belonged to later centuries. For the medieval seafarer, such a luxury was still unimaginable. It's well documented that hammocks were not introduced to European ships until after contact with the Americas in the late 15th and early 16th centuries. Columbus himself noted their use among Caribbean peoples, who wove them from cotton or palm fibers. Before that, sailors of northern waters had to manage with far cruder arrangements, sleeping on boards or among cargo. So when you imagine yourself on this ship in the biting cold of a North Sea winter, remember you won't be gently swaying in a sling. You'll be sprawled on timber or straw, aching with every roll of the hull. One odd practice worth noting is how some crews, desperate for elevation off the damp floor, would fashion rope cradles by looping heavy cord between beams. These makeshift nets sagged awkwardly, digging into ribs and leaving rope burns on bare skin. They weren't true hammocks, but they offered a reprieve from vermin scuttling across the planks below. Imagine dozing with rope pressed into your side, only to wake stiff and bruised. A sailor might decide the deck was preferable after all. Scholarly opinion has never fully settled on how widely these improvised rope beds were used. Some argue that shipwreck evidence points to bundles of rushes or hides as the dominant method, with no trace of woven supports. Others suggest that sailors' songs and sketches hint at experimental slings strung beneath deck beams, even if crude. The lack of physical artifacts leaves us with stories and guesses rather than certainty. You can almost hear the arguments, can't you? A sailor claiming his net sling saved him from a rat bite, another grumbling that he rolled right out of his. Still, all agreed that anything to lift the body a few inches higher meant less damp seeping in, less chance of sickness. The sea demanded compromise, and comfort was always the last consideration. So as you rest in the imagined gloom, remind yourself, no canvas hammock will cradle you tonight. That invention lies centuries in the future. Here, your sleep will be closer to the floor, closer to the rats, closer to the cold, and much farther from any dream of comfort. You step carefully over the uneven planks, and the question arises, if no hammocks cradle the weary, what exactly do sailors place their bodies upon? The answer is as raw as the sea itself, bare planks, sometimes softened by whatever scrap of padding could be spared. A ship was built for trade and war, not for softness. The boards beneath you are hard, splintered, and unyielding. And yet, this was the nightly bed for countless men. Contemporary accounts reveal that the average sailor in the Middle Ages often slept directly on the deck or in corners cleared between barrels of cargo. A thin mat of rushes or a ragged blanket might separate flesh from timber, but more often there was nothing at all. The human body was expected to endure, just as it endured rope burns, frostbite, and hunger. Comfort was a word reserved for lords and abbots, not sailors tossing in the hold of a ship. Curiously, sailors sometimes layered straw brought aboard as animal fodder beneath themselves, turning feed into bedding. By morning, the straw was damp, salty, and flattened into little more than mush, but for a few hours it softened the blows of wood against bone. And if no straw was at hand, a scrap of old sailcloth might be spread across the planks, its coarse fibers scratching the skin yet at least offering a symbolic barrier against the chill. Researchers puzzle over whether mats woven from reeds or seagrasses were common among northern crews. Some argue that fragments found in wrecks could have been sleeping pads, while others suggest they were only packing material used to cushion fragile cargo. No consensus exists, which leaves us peering into the dark with only fragments of possibility. Did a sailor in the Baltic curl up on a carefully woven mat, or did he simply collapse on raw timber, letting exhaustion numb the pain? You picture yourself now lowering your body to the floor. The wood is unforgiving. It creaks and digs into your shoulder, your hip, the back of your skull. You shift, trying to find a position where the knots don't jab, but the ship moves and spoils every attempt. Your muscles ache before sleep even begins. And yet, fatigue is stronger. After hauling ropes in freezing spray all day, even bare planks feel like a strange kind of mercy. A rat scurries by. You hear its claws clicking against the boards, and you pull your cloak tighter. Around you, other men are sprawled in awkward angles. One with his arm across a coil of rope, another wedged against a barrel, using it as a crude headrest. The air is heavy with breath, salt and damp. You realize that here, in this wooden cave, the line between comfort and misery is so blurred that sailors stopped noticing long ago. And still you close your eyes, pretending that the groaning timbers are a lullaby, that the slap of waves is a mother's hush. You tell yourself that a plank is a bed, and that tomorrow the sun will rise, even if warmth does not come with it. You stir in the dark belly of the ship, pulling your cloak tighter around your shoulders, but the cold bites anyway. It seeps through the seams of the vessel as though the sea itself has fingers and a cruel sense of humor. And here, in the absence of fire, the only defense is what you can wrap around your weary body. For many medieval sailors, that meant animal skins, hides, and pelts salvaged from home or traded at ports along the voyage. These weren't luxurious furs trimmed into finery for nobles. They were rough, practical, and often foul-smelling, but in winter seas, even the stench of an old hide was a gift. It's well documented that seafarers frequently used sheepskins, goat hides, or even scraps of deerskin to cover themselves when the temperature plummeted. These were not tailored garments so much as crude blankets. The fur side faced inward when possible, holding warmth close, while the leather side, stiffened with salt, faced the damp air. A sailor might curl up inside one like a cocoon, hoping it would keep the frost from chewing at his bones. And for officers, thicker pelts, perhaps wolf or bear skins, sometimes made an appearance, though these were rare on ordinary merchant ships. One offbeat detail worth noting: sometimes hides still bore a faint animal smell, especially if they hadn't been properly cured. Imagine lying half asleep, half frozen, with the musk of sheep clinging to your face. Some sailors joked that it was like sleeping in the barn they'd left behind on shore. Others simply accepted it. The sea robbed you of choice as efficiently as it robbed you of warmth. Still, there was something oddly comforting about having a reminder of land, even if that reminder came in the form of a smelly, shedding skin. Specialists remain divided on how widespread the use of animal skins truly was at sea. Some argue that hides were too valuable to waste as bedding, especially when they could be sold for profit at the next port. Others counter that evidence from wills and inventories of sailors' possessions, lists sheepskins and pelts, specifically as personal items carried aboard. Perhaps it varied by region. The North Sea's biting cold might demand skins more than the milder Mediterranean climate, where a thin blanket could suffice. You roll the thought over in your mind as you imagine lying beneath such a skin. The leather is stiff, cracking at the edges where salt and damp have hardened it. The fur side, though, is soft against your cheek. It tickles, and strands cling to your lips as you exhale. It isn't pleasant, but compared to nothing at all, it's heavenly. Around you, other sailors mutter and shift, each bundled in whatever rags, cloaks, or hides they manage to bring. One man wraps himself in a patched woolen blanket. Another curls beneath a horsehide still reeking faintly of the stable. You can almost smell it yourself, the mingling of damp fur, wet wood, and stale sweat. It's the odor of endurance, of bodies refusing to surrender. Your back aches against the boards, but at least the hide traps enough warmth to keep your teeth from rattling. Occasionally, a sailor might trade a precious scrap of fur for food or ale in port, only to regret it bitterly when winter seas set in. Imagine the temptation of bread or strong drink versus the slow torture of frost. Choices at sea were rarely generous. Every trade carried a hidden cost. Those who parted with their hides quickly learned the lesson of the cold, and some never lived to tell it. Picture, too, the camaraderie that such hardship forged. Men huddled together, their skins overlapping, turning a row of half-frozen bodies into one long shared blanket. The warmth of another man's breath might be unwelcome in a tavern, but here it could mean the difference between waking and never waking at all. Beneath the flicker of a lantern, the sight would be almost comical. Grown men bundled like sheep in the very skins of sheep. Yet this was survival, and on a winter voyage, survival carried no shame. What's striking is how this use of animal hides echoes practices on land. In rural Europe, peasants also used sheepskins and goatskins as bedding through the cold months, layering them with straw or rushes. The sea mirrored the land, only harsher, lonelier, and with less chance of dry warmth. The sailor's bed was simply a peasant's bed transported to a rocking wooden cage. As you settle into this imagined hide, your ears fill with the sound of timbers groaning in protest. The ship shifts, and icy spray filters down through cracks in the deck above. Droplets spatter your face, startling you awake each time you begin to drift. The fur keeps your core warm enough, but your nose and fingers still burn with cold. You rub your hands together, tuck them beneath the pelt, and try to dream of hearth fires that never go out. Dreaming itself becomes a fragile thing here. The line between waking and sleeping blurs when discomfort gnaws constantly at your senses. Your body longs to collapse, but your mind resists the darkness, aware that too much cold sleep can be dangerous. You wonder, did sailors of the time ever fear slipping into a sleep that became final? Records don't say, but the thought feels plausible as you fight to keep your eyes open even in this reenacted imagination. And then comes the peculiar comfort. You are not alone. The sailor beside you snores softly, a strange reassurance that life clings stubbornly to him too. Another coughs, hacking through the damp air. These sounds are not peaceful, yet they stitch you into the fabric of a crew bound by shared suffering. The pelts may stink, the boards may bruise, but together you endure the winter sea. What's remarkable is how ordinary this was for them. We shiver just imagining it, yet for the medieval mariner, it was simply another night. Tomorrow would be another watch, another battle with ropes frozen stiff, another attempt at rest with nothing more than fur between flesh and frost. No complaints, because complaint changed nothing. Instead, the men laughed when they could, cursed when they must, and curled beneath their hides when darkness fell. So you drift in this vision, the hide pressed close, the smell strong, the cold relentless. Outside, waves slap the hull like an endless drumbeat. Inside, bodies breathe in ragged unison. Sleep comes slowly, but eventually, exhaustion wins, and you surrender not to comfort, but to the inevitability of rest. This is how medieval sailors survived their winter nights, not with luxury, but with scraps of fur, stubbornness, and a touch of grim humor. You open your eyes again in that cramped wooden cave, and what strikes you first is how close everyone is. The air feels thick, pressed down by bodies, each man lying shoulder to shoulder in the hold like sardines in a barrel. Privacy is not merely rare, it doesn't exist. When the time comes to rest, the crew collapses together, a row of weary figures lined up across the planks, wrapped in cloaks or skins, all breathing the same damp, salty air. Records show that ordinary sailors in the Middle Ages had no personal sleeping space. Unlike officers who might claim a curtained berth or a narrow cabin tucked into the stern castle, the average deckhand curled up wherever he could find a gap. Once one man settled, another filled the spot beside him, and soon the floor became a patchwork of limbs, hides, and cloaks. Sleep was communal, dictated by the limited square footage of the ship's hull. A curious little note from travelers' journals describes the experience as a bench of brothers, bound by breath. Imagine the humor of its sailors comparing the closeness of the ship's hold to a monk's dormitory, only without the prayers, the silence, or the fresh rushes changed regularly. Instead, You lay pressed against your comrade's shoulder, both of you shivering, and perhaps you muttered a joke before drifting into shallow dreams. It wasn't camaraderie born of choice, but of necessity, and that made it all the stronger. Scholarly opinion remains divided on whether sailors rotated sleeping spots or if a man claimed the same plank night after night. Some argue that routine mattered, each sailor knowing his small patch the way you might know a bed at home. Others suggest that space was first come, first served, so a latecomer from watch might find himself squeezed into the narrowest gap, legs half draped over a coil of rope. The truth may lie somewhere between, the ship too chaotic for strict assignment, yet too small to allow much variety. Now picture yourself in that line of bodies. Your left arm is pressed against another man's back, and his breath huffs warm air into the darkness. On your right, someone shifts, turning onto his side, his elbow jabbing you in the ribs. The rhythm of the group becomes your lullaby, snoring here, coughing there, a whispered curse as someone rolls over. The sounds mingle with the creak of the timbers, until it's hard to tell whether the groans come from wood or flesh. The smell grows heavier, salt stiffens clothing, sweat seeps into hides, and unwashed bodies lie within inches of one another. You wrinkle your nose, but there's no escape. You can't move farther away without colliding with another sleeping form. So you breathe shallowly, letting your mind drift elsewhere, clinging to the idea of clean air you once knew ashore. Strangely, this closeness bred a kind of comfort. When the cold seeped through the planks, human heat became a shield. Men huddled together, wrapping arms or sharing cloaks, not out of affection but survival. And yet, in that survival, a certain bond formed. You trusted the man beside you because he, too, endured the same discomforts, the same frozen nights, the same aching limbs. In the morning, you would both rise and face the ropes, the sails, the biting sea. Sleep was communal because life was communal. Imagine trying to dream in this press of bodies. You drift in and out, pulled half awake by every cough, every shift, every groan. Someone snores so loudly you're certain the sound will wake the fish. Another mumbles nonsense, words caught between dream and waking. You roll your eyes in the dark, but exhaustion drags you down again. Eventually, the chorus becomes background noise. The closeness, just another fact of shipboard life. One striking comparison is to life ashore. In medieval villages, families often slept together in one bed or on straw spread across the floor. Parents, children, even servants shared the same space in winter, huddled for warmth. The sea simply magnified that reality, stripping away even the walls of a cottage. The ship became a communal bedroom, one giant pallet of weary bodies swaying with the waves. Now let your senses absorb it fully. The creak of beams overhead, the faint drip of seawater through cracks, the rough timber beneath your back, the press of shoulders against yours, the stink of too many men in too little space. It is not a nightmare, it is nightly life. You learn to surrender to it, to accept that closeness is not a burden but a condition of survival. And perhaps, just perhaps, in that forced intimacy, there is a strange comfort. The sea is vast and merciless, but here, pressed among your comrades, you are not alone. Their warmth is your warmth, their snores your lullaby, their shifting bodies your companions in the endless cold. You sigh, close your eyes, and let exhaustion pull you under. One more body among the many, one more voice in the chorus of communal sleep. You shift in your makeshift corner of the hull, and suddenly you realize the strangeness of what counts as a pillow here. There is no feather-stuffed cushion, no neatly folded cloth. Instead, you rest your head on whatever object happens to be, nearby cargo, rope, or even a damp sack of provisions. The medieval ship was not designed with comfort in mind. It was a floating storeroom and a workplace. The sailor's pillow was always improvised. It's well recorded in merchant ledgers and sailors' letters that barrels of salted fish, sacks of flour, or even rolled-up cloaks doubled as headrests during long voyages. A barrel might dig cruelly into your neck, A sack might smell of mildew, and a coiled rope could leave indentations across your cheek. But when exhaustion gnawed at you after hours of hauling frozen rigging, these objects became luxuries. Anything that lifted the skull a little higher, anything that kept your face off the wet planks, was seized upon with gratitude. One odd image that surfaces in scattered anecdotes is of sailors tucking their heads against bundles of sailcloth. Rolled tightly, the sails formed lumpy bolsters, still damp from sea spray. Sailors joked that they were literally resting their dreams on the same canvas that kept them alive in storms. The fabric smelled of tar, salt, and mildew, yet in those conditions it might have felt almost comforting. In the dark, a rough roll of cloth could seem as precious as velvet. Researchers continue to debate whether sailors were allowed to keep personal bags or chests nearby for use as bedding. Some evidence suggests that personal belongings were stowed separately to avoid clutter, while other sources describe seamen using their sea chests as both pillows and footrests. Imagine it, your head on a hard wooden lid that doubled as your entire store of worldly goods. Every creak reminded you of the fragile line between possession and loss. If the sea took the chest, it took both your property and your pillow. You let your imagination settle into the scene. Your cheek presses against a coil of hemp rope, rough strands scraping your skin. The smell is sharp, resinous, with a hint of mildew. You adjust your position, but the rope leaves ridges along your jaw. Beside you, another sailor has his head on a half-empty flour sack. Each time he breathes, a puff of white dust escapes, drifting like ghostly powder into the air. Across the row, someone uses a barrel as a headboard. His neck craned at such an angle you wonder how he'll wake without pain. And yet, these men found ways to adapt. Fatigue dulled the discomfort. Within minutes of lying down, their bodies gave in, and even the hardest barrel seemed softer than it had a moment before. The trick was not comfort, it was surrender. You didn't wait for a pleasant bed. You convinced yourself that whatever object lay beneath your head was good enough. In that act of acceptance, rest came more easily. Imagine trying to dream under such conditions. Your mind drifts, but the sack beneath your skull shifts suddenly, and your head thumps against the plank. You curse under your breath, then tug it back into place, folding the top edge to make a ridge that supports your neck. It isn't elegant, but it keeps you from waking again. The scene grows more vivid as you notice how these objects carried risks as well. A sack of grain might leak, attracting rats to skitter over your face in the dark. A barrel might shift with the motion of the waves, rolling just enough to jar your skull awake. Even coils of rope could turn treacherous, unwinding slightly and tipping your head at an awkward angle. Sleep was never guaranteed, only borrowed, stolen in snatches when the sea allowed it. And yet, there's something oddly human about the inventiveness. You recall how peasants ashore used straw-stuffed pillows or even bundles of rags tied together. Sailors did the same, but with whatever the sea delivered: hemp rope instead of rags, flour sacks instead of straw, sailcloth instead of linen. The parallel is striking. Whether on land or sea, people always sought a way to cradle their heads, to soften the edge of exhaustion with something between bone and earth. Think now of your own body in this setting. Your head rests on a coil of rope, the ship rocking beneath you. Each creak of timber shifts your balance, each roll pressing the rope deeper into your jaw. You sigh, close your eyes, and let the discomfort blur into the background. The rope becomes less a torture and more a part of you, its roughness mingling with your dreams. Perhaps you even dream of fields of hemp, tall stalks swaying in the wind, their fibers destined to follow you to sea. You smile faintly at the irony, dreaming of the very material that digs into your skin. This is how the mind adapts, transforming hardship into something bearable. You learn to see a barrel not as a burden but as a cradle, a sack not as a chore but as a cushion, and in that transformation you find just enough comfort to slip into sleep, however brief, however shallow. It's a strange sort of lesson, isn't it? That the human spirit clings to small mercies even when surrounded by misery. A pillow of rope is still a pillow. A sack of grain is still a chance for rest. The medieval sailor knew this, and so do you here in this imagined voyage. You curl tighter, head pressed against your chosen object, and drift at last into uneasy dreams, the sea's voice echoing through the wood around you. The lantern flickers above you, its flame trembling with every sway of the ship. Shadows leap and retreat across the planks like restless ghosts. It's night, but there is no true darkness here, just a dim, unsteady glow from oil lamps or candles set carefully in iron brackets. Without them, the hold would be black as pitch, a suffocating void. With them, the crew could see enough to shift into place, to check the rigging, or to stir in their sleep. But those fragile lights carried both reassurance and risk. Contemporary accounts reveal that medieval sailors used simple tallow candles or small oil lamps for night illumination. These were not bright, clean-burning flames, but smoky, sputtering ones that filled the air with the smell of fat or rancid oil. They barely lit more than a few feet around them. So much of the ship remained swallowed in shadow. The glow was uneven, and the shadows it cast could play tricks on weary eyes. For a sailor half asleep, a rope might look like a snake, a shifting shadow like a prowling figure. Perhaps the strangest little detail lies in the way sailors sometimes fashioned lamps out of seashells or shallow metal dishes, filling them with oil and floating a scrap of rag as a wick. These makeshift lamps were placed on flat stones or suspended in metal cages to reduce the chance of fire. Even so, the danger was constant. A wave rocking the hull too sharply might tip oil onto the planks, or a careless elbow could knock a candle into dry rope. One careless accident could turn the ship into a floating pyre. Sailors never forgot this, which is why captains often forbade lamps below deck unless absolutely necessary. Specialists remain divided on how much light crews were permitted during voyages. Some suggest lamps were strictly controlled, snuffed as soon as men lay down to rest. Others believe sailors bargained with the rules, keeping a single wick burning for comfort and orientation. Without surviving ship regulations from every region, it's hard to say. But what is clear is that fear of fire haunted every crew. Ships carried tar, pitch, and rope, all perfect fuel. One ember out of place could end hundreds of lives. You feel it in your imagination, the soft glow of a single lamp trembling against the hull. Your face is half lit, half shadowed. The man beside you shifts, his features flickering in and out of the dark, as though he were two people at once. You hear a cough across the hold and see only the vaguest silhouette. The dimness disorients you, but it is still better than blindness. At least the light reminds you where you are, that you are not alone in a world of endless shadow. The smell, however, is not kind. Tallow candles reek of animal fat, their smoke clinging to clothes already thick with salt and sweat. Oil lamps offer no relief. They spit and crackle, filling the hold with a sharp tang that catches in your throat. You breathe shallowly, but still the stench settles into your skin. For sailors accustomed to foul bilges and rotten food, this may not have seemed unbearable, but to you it is a constant reminder that every sense is under siege. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine lying down, cloak wrapped tightly, fur pelt over your chest, and a candle guttering nearby. The light dances across the beams above, and each flicker makes the wood appear alive, bending and writhing like ribs of some great beast. You half expect the ship itself to groan louder, to creak and snap in time with the flame. The illusion is enough to keep you restless. And yet, the flame also soothes. Without it, the dark feels suffocating, pressing in from every side. With it, you can trace outlines, the curve of a barrel, the slope of a shoulder, the familiar coil of rope at your feet. The light becomes a tether to reality, a fragile comfort in a place where comforts are few. Picture the sailor's routine. Before bedding down, one man trims the wick, shielding the flame with his palm. Another mutters about the fire risk, urging him to snuff it quickly. But the others plead for a little more glow, at least until they drift off. In the end, compromise rules the night. A single lamp remains, its dim pulse holding the shadows at bay. while the rest of the ship sinks into uneasy quiet. The risk never fades, though. Every sailor has heard stories of ships lost to careless flames. Some tales exaggerate, telling of whole fleets destroyed by a single candle. Whether true or not, the fear lingers. You imagine drifting half asleep, suddenly jolted awake by the acrid scent of smoke, the panic of men shouting, "Fire!" You shiver at the thought, understanding why captains were so strict. Better the cold and dark than an inferno at sea. Still, human beings crave light. You crave it even now in this imagined voyage. A faint glow offers hope, a reminder that even in the heart of winter's night, flame persists. It is fragile, yes, but it is stubborn too, just like the sailors who guarded it, coaxed it, argued over it, and sometimes risked their lives to keep it alive. So you lie back, half grateful, half uneasy, watching the flame sputter. It is a double-edged gift, comfort and danger bound together. And as your eyelids grow heavy, the last thing you see is that trembling light, wavering but unbroken, holding back the dark as long as it dares. The lamp gutters, then steadies, and in its faint glow you catch a sound you cannot mistake. Someone nearby snores a deep, rattling growl that rattles against the timbers like a saw blade. Another man groans in his sleep, and a third lets out a wet cough that echoes through the hold. The night aboard a medieval ship is never quiet. Sleep comes not with silence, but with a chorus of noises you must learn to accept. It's well recorded in medical tracts and sailors' letters that seafaring life was plagued by two persistent companions, snoring and seasickness. Place dozens of men in a cramped wooden box, rock them endlessly across icy seas, and the result is predictable. Some men snored like thunder, others wretched in misery, their stomachs never adjusting to the constant sway. The two sounds together created a strange lullaby, half comedy, half torment. An odd detail recounted in a 15th century traveller's memoir describes sailors so accustomed to vomit in the dark that they slept with their cloaks pulled over their heads, hoping to shield their faces from the spray of a seasick bunkmate. Imagine it. You finally drift into half-sleep, only to be spattered awake by someone else's misery. It wasn't rare, it was routine. Specialists still puzzle over how much seasickness affected professional sailors versus passengers. Some argue that men hardened by years at sea developed a resistance, while others insist that no one, however seasoned, could entirely escape the nausea when storms grew violent. Perhaps both are true tolerance built with experience, but never immunity. What's certain is that the sounds of retching and gagging were as much a part of shipboard nights as the creak of the hull. Picture the hold again. You lie curled on a plank, a pelt draped across your chest, and to your left a man snores so loudly you feel it vibrate through the wood. To your right, another shifts, swallows, and then leans over a bucket with a sickening splatter. The smell rises instantly sour, sharp, mingling with the damp odor of bilge water. You gag, but where can you go? The hold offers no escape. You turn your head, press your face into your cloak, and will yourself to think of home. Yet not all sounds are unpleasant. Some sailors hummed softly, lullabies stolen from childhood or chants picked up in port taverns. These murmurs mingled with the rougher noises, weaving a strange tapestry of human resilience. You might wake to a grumble, then hear a gentle tune threaded through the dark, and for a moment the sea feels less cruel. Imagine trying to sleep through this chaos. At first, every noise grates against your nerves, jolting you awake just as you drift off. But fatigue has its own power. After days of hauling ropes and braving spray, your body learns to surrender even in the din. The snores become a rhythm. The coughs a reminder that you are not alone. The retching another piece of the soundtrack. Eventually, you slip under, your brain filtering noise into a kind of background lull. One striking comparison is to life in medieval towns. There, too, people slept in shared rooms filled with snoring, coughing, and the shuffle of restless bodies. Privacy was rare even on land. But at sea, the sounds were amplified by wood and water, echoing against the hull, magnified by confinement. The ship was not just a home, it was an echo chamber of human discomfort. Close your eyes in this imagined moment. The lamp flickers, the shadows dance, and the air vibrates with sound. Snores, coughs, retches, murmurs, the slap of waves, the groan of timber. You are not drifting into silence, but into noise, and somehow, that noise becomes your lullaby, carrying you into uneasy dreams. Perhaps you dream of silence itself, an empty field, snow falling without a sound, the hush of wind across open land. And then you wake, back in the hold, reminded that silence belongs to the shore, not to the sea. Here, the night is alive with voices, both human and inhuman, and you must learn to rest in their company. The bell tolls above deck, a muffled clang carried down the hatch, and with it the fragile web of sleep snaps. Your eyes drag open, though your body pleads to stay still. Duty calls always at the wrong moment. On medieval ships, sleep was never a long, unbroken stretch, but a patchwork of fragments, carved into pieces by the relentless rhythm of watches. Contemporary sources describe the ship's time divided into watches, shifts that typically lasted 4 hours. Day and night blurred together into a cycle of work and rest, a rhythm that cared little for sunrise or midnight. A sailor might crawl into his corner of the hull just as another was dragged out of it, like pieces in a sliding puzzle. If your watch fell at midnight, you rose. If it ended before dawn, you collapsed again into the damp planks. Rest was broken, scattered, and never enough. One unusual practice worth noting is how sailors used bells to mark these shifts. The ringing echoed across the deck and down into the hold, a metallic reminder that no man could escape his duty. Even below, wrapped in a pelt, half dreaming of home, the sound pierced you awake. Some sailors joked grimly that the bell was louder in their dreams than in waking life. Imagine being so trained to respond that even when asleep on land, a sailor might startle at the toll of a village church bell, thinking it was time for his watch. No consensus exists among scholars about whether broken sleep damaged sailors' health as severely as it does today. Some argue that men grew accustomed, training their bodies to survive on fragments of slumber, while others insist that chronic exhaustion contributed to the high mortality rates at sea. The truth may lie in the middle. Sailors endured because they had no choice, but the toll showed itself in aching limbs, dulled senses, and shortened lives. You picture the moment. You've just managed to warm your chest beneath a goat hide, your cheek pressed against a rope coil, when the bell rings. A fellow sailor nudges you roughly, muttering that it's your turn. Groaning, you sit up, joints stiff, breath visible in the icy air. You want to curse the sea itself, but words freeze on your tongue. You clamber to your feet, slipping into stiff boots, and drag yourself toward the ladder. Sleep has left your body half-charged, never fully restored. Back above deck, the wind slaps your face, the cold cutting deeper now because your body was lulled into stillness. The stars glitter overhead, indifferent. The rigging creaks, sails snap, and you force your numb fingers to grip the ropes. This is the cruel pattern. Exhaustion followed by labor followed by exhaustion. There is no long reprieve, only the cycle of fragments. When your shift ends, you stumble back below, hoping to reclaim some minutes of rest. But the hold is alive with sound, the snores, coughs, and whispers of men who remain behind. You find your spot again, pull your cloak tighter, and lie down. But sleep doesn't come easily. Your body aches, your mind hums with the rhythm of the ropes you just handled, and you know another bell will soon tear you from this attempt. And yet, men adapted. Over time, they learned to fall asleep almost instantly, to steal rest in any condition. Some could drop into slumber within seconds of lying down, waking at the faintest call of their name. This skill became survival itself, the ability to rest in fragments, to treat minutes like treasures. Think of how different this was from life ashore. A peasant might work from dawn to dusk, and then collapse into hours of uninterrupted sleep, rising with the Sunday. A sailor had no such luxury. His clock was the ship's clock, carved into pieces by bells and shifts, dictated by wind and waves. The sea stole time itself, bending it into cycles that left men weary but unbroken. You imagine yourself lying there again, knowing the bell will sound soon. You breathe shallowly, forcing your body to relax, praying for even a few minutes of oblivion. Your muscles twitch, your eyelids sag, and just as you drift, the sound comes again, a metallic toll that cuts through the dark like a blade. Someone shakes you, and the cycle begins anew. It is a cruel rhythm, but also strangely unifying. Every man aboard shares in it. Every man wakes to the same sound. Every man stumbles through the same exhaustion. The bell is both enemy and companion. Its toll a reminder that you are part of something larger than yourself. A crew bound not just by ropes but by sleeplessness, by the discipline of the watch. And so the night stretches on, broken into pieces, until dawn comes not as relief but as another fragment in the endless pattern of work and rest. You sigh, close your eyes once more, and let yourself be carried into shallow, fleeting dreams, knowing the bell will always find you again. The bell has barely stopped ringing when the first rumble comes, deep and distant. At first you might mistake it for thunder, but soon it becomes unmistakable. The hollow boom of waves striking the hull, the ship shudders, timbers creaking in protest, and the fragile balance of sleep is lost once more. Storms at sea are merciless at the best of times, but in the dead of winter they are a trial of nerves, and for those trying to sleep below deck, they are a torment without end. It's well documented in medieval travel accounts that winter storms could last for days, trapping crews in cycles of constant noise, violent motion, and fear. Ships of the period lacked the reinforced hulls or advanced rigging of later centuries. Their wooden bodies groaned under the strain, and every man aboard knew how easily the sea could swallow them whole. To sleep during such a storm was not rest. It was a desperate act of trust in wood, rope, and fortune. One odd detail recounted in sailors' tales is that men often tied themselves to posts or beams while lying down, so they wouldn't be thrown across the hold by the ship's lurching. Picture it. Instead of a bed, you have a plank and a rope around your waist, pinning you in place as the vessel bucks like a maddened horse. The knot might dig into your side, the rope burn your skin, but at least you wouldn't wake sprawled across someone else's legs or worse, sliding into the bilge water that sloshed back and forth at the bottom of the hull. Researchers continue to debate how much sleep was even possible during the height of a storm. Some argue that exhaustion forced men into half-sleep despite the chaos, while others believe true rest was nearly impossible, with sailors instead dozing in brief, startled snatches. Accounts vary, but all agree that storms robbed the body as surely as hunger or cold. The noise alone could drive a man half mad. You hear it now in your imagination. The boom of a wave slamming into the side, the rattle of rigging above, the shriek of wood bending under strain. Each sound is magnified in the dark, each creak a whisper that the hull might split. The men around you groan and curse as the ship lurches again, bodies rolling against each other despite the ropes that hold them. Somewhere a lantern clatters, the flame nearly dying before flaring again, and for a moment you think you smell smoke. Your own body is no refuge. The rocking pitches you from side to side, your stomach twisting in knots. You clutch your makeshift pillow, a coil of rope or a sack, and pray it keeps you anchored. But the motion never stops, never relents. It is as if the sea itself is shaking you awake each time you begin to drift. And then there is the cold. Winter storms do not bring gentle rain but icy spray driven down through cracks in the deck, soaking hides and cloaks. You wake damp, the chill seeping deep into your bones. The man beside you mutters a prayer to Street Nicholas, patron of sailors, and you whisper one yourself, though whether you believe it will help, you do not know. Imagine the smell, the bilge water stirred up by constant motion, the damp hides reeking of wet fur, the acrid sting of tallow smoke barely clinging to its wick. You gag, but there's no fresh air. The hatches are battened down to keep out the storm, leaving you and your crewmates sealed in a wooden box, tossed endlessly on the waves. The air grows heavy with sweat and fear. Some men try to joke, calling the thunderous waves the drummer's song, but the humor is thin. Most simply endure in silence, listening to the hull's groans as if waiting for the final crack. You might press your hands over your ears, but it does no good. The storm fills every sense. It is in the sound, the smell, the taste of salt on your lips, the cold that gnaws at your toes. Think of how different it is from sleep on land. A storm in a village might rattle shutters or howl in the chimney, but you still had walls, a roof, and solid ground beneath you. Here, every gust feels like a hand trying to tear the ship apart. Every wave a fist against the hull. You are not safe. You are never safe. And still, you must try to sleep. Close your eyes in this vision. The noise swells, the ship heaves, and your stomach lurches again. You clutch the rope at your waist, mutter a curse at the sea, and force your eyelids down. Sleep comes not because the storm relents, but because your body has no choice. It shuts down despite the chaos, dragging you into shallow dreams where the booming of waves becomes drums, the creak of timbers becomes voices, and the icy spray becomes ghostly fingers brushing your skin. But it never lasts. A crash louder than the rest jolts you awake, heart hammering, certain the hull has split. Around you men curse and scramble, only to settle again when the ship somehow steadies. You lie back, trembling, knowing you'll never truly rest until the storm passes, but also knowing you must endure. This is life at sea in winter, rest stolen in moments, fear humming always at the edges, the storm your lullaby whether you want it or not. And so you lie there, half awake, half dreaming, listening to the sea's relentless pounding. The storm does not care if you sleep. The sea has never cared. But somehow in this cruel rhythm, you close your eyes again, surrendering to exhaustion, daring to believe the timbers will hold until morning. The storm has passed, though the air is still heavy with damp. You might think peace has returned, but the cold seeps in now more fiercely than before. A gale in winter leaves behind, not calm, but drafts that slip through every crack in the hull. Below deck, the temperature sinks until breath rises in pale clouds, and frost bites at fingers and toes. Sleep becomes a battle not against noise but against the creeping chill that waits in every shadow. It is attested in seafaring chronicles that frostbite was a constant hazard during winter voyages. Sailors lost sensation in their extremities. Their fingers stiffened until they could no longer grip ropes. Their toes blackened after nights on frozen planks. The ship's interior was no sanctuary. Wooden walls offered little insulation, and condensation from the men's own breath froze on beams overhead, dripping back down as icy water. To lie down was to invite the cold to creep closer. One peculiar observation found in a 14th century log is that sailors sometimes slept with their hands tucked deep into their armpits or between their thighs, using their own bodies as heaters. Some curled into tight balls like hibernating animals, while others pressed their backs against their shipmates, forming chains of human warmth. It was less a gesture of affection than an instinctive attempt to stop the frost from claiming another victim. There is still lively debate among maritime historians about whether medieval ships carried enough blankets, cloaks, or hides for the entire crew. Inventories suggest a shortage of proper coverings, with officers better supplied, and common sailors left to fend for themselves. Some argue that cloaks were issued as standard equipment, while others believe most men brought their own from home wool, fur, or whatever scrap they could afford. If you had none, you relied on proximity to others and the sheer stubbornness of your body to survive. Picture yourself lying on the hard deck now. The cold creeps up through the planks, biting into your back as though the wood itself has turned to ice. You wrap your cloak tighter, but it's stiff with salt and offers little protection. The tips of your fingers tingle painfully, then go numb. You blow warm air into your palms, but the chill devours it in seconds. Your toes ache with a deep, gnawing pain that promises worse if you don't keep shifting them. Every few minutes you wiggle them furiously, trying to keep blood flowing. The smells only make the cold sharper. Damp wool reeks of mildew, wet hides give off a sour animal musk, and the air is thick with breath frozen into mist. You inhale and feel your nose sting as icy air scrapes your lungs. Someone beside you coughs a deep, rasping sound that suggests sickness. You shiver harder, partly from the cold, partly from the thought of how quickly illness could spread in such close quarters. Above, the timbers groan as if even the ship is shivering. A droplet of icy condensation falls from the beam overhead, landing on your forehead. You flinch, curse softly, and pull the pelt tighter over your face. But the damp spreads anyway, soaking the hide until it clings cold against your skin. There is no dryness here, only layers of chill and moisture, each stealing a fraction more of your warmth. You wonder how men endured weeks of this, months even, without collapse. Perhaps the answer lies in sheer necessity. Work awaited at dawn, frozen ropes to haul, sails to mend, and sleep was the only way to gather enough strength to survive the day. No matter how bitter the cold, exhaustion eventually forced the body into rest. It wasn't peaceful, but it was unavoidable. Fatigue is the greatest persuader. Imagine trying to dream in this cold. Your body curls into itself, shivering even as your mind drifts. The dream becomes strange, perhaps, of snowfields back home, where at least a fire waited at the hearth center. You wake and realize there is no fire here, only the relentless dark. The contrast stings sharper than the frost. The comparison to land life is striking again. In a peasant's cottage, straw beds were spread before the hearth, and though smoke might sting your eyes, the fire gave warmth. At sea, no such fire could be risked. The ship was wood and tar. One spark meant death. So sailors endured frostbite, huddled together like livestock, relying on body heat and stubbornness to keep the cold at bay. You reach out in this imagined hold, pressing closer to your neighbor. His body radiates a small measure of heat, enough to thaw your frozen hands for a moment. He grunts in his sleep, but doesn't push you away. He knows you'll do the same for him when the cold shifts direction. That small, grudging warmth is more precious than gold. And so the night stretches on, each breath a cloud in the dark, each shiver a reminder that the sea does not forgive. You drift at last into uneasy slumber, frost clinging to your lashes, the draught stealing warmth no matter how tightly you curl. Sleep, here, is not comfort but endurance, a nightly bargain struck with the cold, and one you can only hope to win until morning. You wake with a start, teeth chattering, body stiff as timber. The cold has not lifted, it has burrowed deeper, curling itself into your bones. You reach for your cloak, but it is little more than a stiffened rag. Sea spray has dried into a salty crust, turning the fabric into something closer to parchment than wool. Tonight, your blanket is not soft cloth but clothes hardened by wind, brine, and frost. Chroniclers of northern voyages describe sailors wrapping themselves in their own garments at night, often still damp from the day's work. The idea of changing into clean, dry clothes for sleep was a dream reserved for wealthier men ashore. On a medieval ship, every tunic and cloak carried the sea in its fibers. The salt stiffened wool until it crackled, and seams rubbed against the skin like sandpaper. Still, men pulled these garments around themselves, because even a stiff shield was better than nothing against the night air. An unusual detail found in a Scandinavian account notes that sailors sometimes layered on every article of clothing they owned before lying down. A man might wear 2 tunics, leggings, and a cloak all at once, then drape a hide over the pile. He became a bundle of cloth and fur, heavy and awkward, but it kept the cold from cutting straight through. When morning came, those layers were peeled away, only to be soaked again in the spray of the day's work. The process repeated until fabric tore or rotted. Specialists remain divided on whether extra clothing was issued by captains or whether sailors had to provide their own. Some inventories list spare cloaks purchased in port, suggesting at least some effort to supply the crew. Others argue these were exceptions, and most men relied solely on what they could bring from home. Either way, it is clear that clothing doubled as bedding, blankets, and even pillows. There was no wardrobe here. Every scrap of fabric was pressed into service. Imagine it. You huddle in the hold, your cloak crusted white with salt. The edges are stiff, crackling as you fold them tighter around your shoulders. You draw your knees up and tuck your chin into the wool, the smell of the sea sharp in your nose. It is like sleeping wrapped in a net of dried seaweed, rough and unyielding, yet you cling to it because it holds at least a ghost of warmth. Beside you, another sailor lies bundled in every layer he owns. His silhouette is bulky, almost comical, but when he exhales, his breath steams from the tiny opening left for his face. You hear him mutter that he dreams of a feather bed, then laugh bitterly at the thought. Everyone nearby chuckles quietly, not because it's funny, but because laughter is easier than despair. The smell of these makeshift blankets is another torment. Salt mixed with sweat, wool mixed with mildew, it creates a pungent haze that clings to every breath. You press your nose into your sleeve, but it makes little difference. At least the stink is familiar. A sailor might even take comfort in it, the way someone on land grows used to the smell of their own hearth smoke. Now consider the touch, the cloak stiff as bark, edges scraping your cheek, seams biting into your neck. You shift, trying to find softness where none exists, and eventually fatigue dulls the irritation. The body learns to accept, even to crave, the weight of salt-crusted cloth as a sign of protection. Without it, the cold would dig sharper, the drafts creep closer, the night feel endless. There are stories, half truth, half legend, of sailors who froze because they gave up their cloak in trade. A mug of ale in port, a night with a woman, seemed worth it in the moment. But once the ship was back at sea, the loss became clear. Without that stiff, salty shield, they shivered until their teeth cracked and their bodies failed. These tales were repeated as warnings, reminders that comfort ashore must never outweigh survival afloat. As you lie in this imagined hull, you realize that the cloak is not merely fabric, it is memory too. Perhaps it was a gift from a mother or wife, or stitched at home before the voyage. Each thread connects you faintly to the land you left behind. The salt has transformed it, stiffened it, dulled its color, but it remains a link to warmth and belonging. To pull it over your shoulders is to carry a scrap of home into the hostile sea. Dreams, when they come, often circle around clothing. Men dream of soft wool blankets, of shirts dried by a hearth fire, of beds where sheets smell faintly of lavender instead of brine. They wake with cloaks stiff against their skin and laugh bitterly at their own foolishness. And yet, those dreams sustain them too. Imagine your own body swaddled in stiff cloth now. Your arms ache from the weight, your skin itches from the roughness, but beneath it all you feel a thin, stubborn warmth. You close your eyes, press your face deeper into the folds, and try to forget the cracks, the smells, the discomfort. For a few hours, you manage to believe this stiff cloak is a proper blanket, and that the ship is a room, and that sleep is not so far away. This is how medieval sailors survived brutal winter nights, with garments hardened by salt, cloaks that stank of the sea, and a refusal to surrender. They did not sleep comfortably, but they did sleep, wrapped in the only shields they had against the cold. You curl beneath your stiff cloak, the cold creeping through every seam, and wonder what your mind will conjure once your eyes finally close. For sailors of the Middle Ages, sleep was never just about the body. It was also a fragile sanctuary for the mind. In the brutal winter nights at sea, dreams became more than idle illusions. They were escapes, brief voyages away from damp planks and gnawing frost. Contemporary writings remind us that sailors longed constantly for home. Letters preserved from mariners speak of hearth fires, families, and the warmth of familiar beds. In their dreams, Men often saw themselves back on land, sitting by the glow of a fire, eating warm bread, and listening to voices they loved. Dreams of home were so vivid that sailors sometimes woke disoriented, momentarily convinced they were back in their cottages, only to open their eyes and find nothing but timber beams dripping with condensation. The shock could cut deeper than the cold itself. One unusual report, tucked into the diary of a Flemish trader who sailed in the North Sea, describes how men sometimes woke laughing, having dreamed of feasts and full mugs of ale. But just as often they woke crying quietly, ashamed of the tears, because the visions of wives or children had felt too real. Laughter and sorrow mingled in the same crowded hold, both echoing in the darkness like fragile prayers. Scholars remain divided on how much these dream escapes sustained morale versus deepening despair. Some argue that they gave men the strength to endure the promise of return, carried nightly in their sleep. Others suggest that waking from such dreams only sharpened the sting of absence, making men more restless, more prone to fights, and less obedient. Perhaps it was both. Dreams a lifeline and a torment, depending on the man and the night. Imagine yourself now, drifting in that half-sleep where the sea's groans blur into voices. In your dream, you are walking across a field dusted with snow, the sky pale and still. A cottage waits ahead, smoke curling from its chimney, and when you push the door open, warmth floods your skin. Your mother or perhaps your wife smiles, pressing a cup of broth into your hands. You sit, sigh, and feel heat seep into your bones. The dream is so complete you forget the ship. But then the hull shudders, a wave crashing against its side, and the dream shatters. You open your eyes, and instead of a hearth you see darkness. Instead of warmth you feel frost. Instead of family you hear the groans and coughs of your shipmates. For a moment, the loss feels unbearable. You turn your face into your cloak, biting back a sob, and force yourself to remember that dreams are only shadows. Still, the memory lingers, like a coal carried in your chest. Other dreams came too, not just of home, but of strange visions born from exhaustion and fear. Some sailors dreamed of ghostly figures walking the deck, or of great beasts rising from the sea. One man claimed he dreamed of drowning nightly, only to wake gasping as though seawater filled his lungs. Another muttered of a black dog that visited him in his sleep, its eyes glowing like coals. Whether these were dreams or hallucinations from cold and hunger, no one could say, but they became part of the ship's lore. Imagine the hold filled with whispers of these night visions. Men swapping stories when dawn breaks, some laughing, some uneasy. Did the dream mean a storm was coming? Was it a warning of death? The line between superstition and imagination blurred easily in the long nights, and every dream could be twisted into a sign. The comparison with land life once again is striking. Peasants, too, dreamed of warmth and food during the long winters, but they woke with both near at hand a fire, a bowl of pottage, a family beside them. Sailors woke with nothing but salt-stiff cloaks and the endless horizon. Dreams at sea were sharper, precisely because they contrasted so violently with waking life. And so you close your eyes again, knowing the dream may come. Perhaps tonight you'll see home, perhaps a ghost, perhaps nothing at all. But whatever vision appears, it will be yours alone, a fragile comfort carved out of misery. You surrender to it willingly, because in this floating prison, dreams are the only luxury left. You breathe slower, feeling yourself slip toward that boundary where planks fade into fields, where the stink of damp hides fades into the smell of bread baking. You know it won't last. You know the sea will rouse you again with a crash or a draft. But for now, for this brief spell, you are somewhere else. And sometimes, that was enough to keep a sailor alive. The hold is quiet for a moment, but the silence feels brittle. You notice how some men stir uneasily, whispering half-formed words as if speaking to shadows. For the medieval sailor, the night was never just cold and cramped. It was haunted by stories, superstitions, and the unseen world. Sleep itself was a dangerous threshold. The moment you closed your eyes, You weren't just entering dreams. You were stepping into a space where spirits might roam. Chroniclers remind us that sailors of the Middle Ages were profoundly superstitious. They carried charms, muttered prayers, and avoided certain words on board, fearing they might anger the sea. Night amplified these fears. The creak of the hull could sound like footsteps. The slap of water might be heard as a voice. To fall asleep was to risk missing some omen, a warning, a ghostly presence, or a sign that misfortune hovered close. One curious fragment comes from a Portuguese voyage, where it was said that men whispered of shadow women who drifted through the ship at midnight. These spirits supposedly brushed a hand across a sleeper's face, leaving him chilled and restless for days. Were they dreams, hallucinations, or simply the natural shivers of cold mistaken for touches? Whatever the cause, such stories clung to crews and colored their nights with dread. Researchers still debate how much of this folklore was born at sea and how much was imported from land traditions. Some argue sailors carried village ghost stories onto the waves, reshaping them into nautical form. Others believe the sea itself, vast and merciless, bred unique terrors that had no land-bound parallel. There is little agreement, but all acknowledge that fear of the supernatural was woven into maritime life as tightly as rope into rigging. You can feel it now if you let your imagination roam. You lie on the planks, half asleep, and suddenly hear a whisper low, almost human, but swallowed quickly by the groan of the timbers. Was it just your comrade shifting, or something else? Your heart beats faster, and you pull your cloak higher, telling yourself it was nothing. But the thought lingers. What if the sea carries more than water? What if it carries voices too? Others around you share the unease. One man mutters a prayer to the Virgin Mary before pulling his pelt tighter. Another clutches a wooden charm carved into the shape of a fish, believing it wards off evil spirits. You hear a third whisper about Street Elmo's fire, the eerie glow sometimes seen on masts during storms, and how it might be a good omen or a bad one, depending on who you asked. For some, the light was the saint's blessing. For others, it was a harbinger of death. Imagine the effect of these beliefs on sleep. You lie down not just fearing the cold, the rats, or the noise, but wondering whether a spirit might drift past you in the dark. A shadow across your closed eyes becomes an omen. A dream of drowning becomes a prophecy. The sea already threatens your body. Superstition convinces you it might also swallow your soul. And yet, in a strange way, these fears also bound the crew together. Shared superstitions created a shared language, a set of rituals everyone respected. You might laugh at a tale in daylight, but at midnight, when the hull groaned and the water slapped and the air turned colder, you clung to it. Fear became another thread of community, woven alongside labor and hardship. Picture yourself in that space again. The lamp burns low, shadows stretch long, and you hear the faint sound of someone's prayer. Your body aches for sleep, but your mind keeps circling the whispered stories. You tell yourself not to believe them, but when a draught brushes your cheek like fingers, your eyes snap open. For a moment, you're convinced something moved just beyond the lamplight. You breathe deep, steadying yourself. It was only the sea, only the wind, only the ship. That's what you whisper, even if part of you wonders otherwise. And eventually, you doze despite the unease, sliding into dreams colored by superstition. Perhaps you see a glowing figure on the deck, or a dark shape moving below the waves. Perhaps you wake sweating, heart pounding, relieved to find yourself still among the living. For sailors, this was the texture of winter nights. Not just physical hardship, but the mental weight of stories too old to ignore. Every creak was a ghost, every light an omen, every shadow a test of faith. And still they endured, closing their eyes and surrendering to sleep in spite of it all. Because exhaustion always won. Because even fear couldn't hold off slumber forever. You settle again into the vision. Around you, men mutter, pray and fidget, but one by one their breathing slows. The ship sighs, the sea whispers, and superstition fades into the rhythm of slumber. For now, the spirits, real or imagined, remain only at the edge of sight, leaving you to dream in uneasy peace. You are nearly asleep, drifting somewhere between dream and waking, when a sharp movement on the planks jolts you back. Tiny claws, quick and scratchy, scuttle across the boards. A whisk of fur brushes against your ankle, and your stomach twists with disgust. You don't need to open your eyes to know what it is. Every sailor in winter, in summer, in every season, knew this companion, the ship rat. Maritime records and archaeological finds tell us that rodents were unavoidable on medieval vessels. They came aboard with grain sacks, nested in coils of rope, and multiplied quickly in the dark warmth below decks. Crews cursed them, trapped them, sometimes even hunted them for food in desperation. But more often than not, men simply endured their presence. Rats were part of shipboard life, just as waves and winds were. One odd and unsettling detail appears in a 15th century account from a Hanseatic merchant. He describes waking to find a rat nibbling at the salt on his cloak. Imagine it half frozen trying to cling to sleep, only to discover your so-called blanket is dinner for vermin. Others told stories of rats running across men's faces at night, leaving scratches or even biting soft ears. Some men laughed it off, saying the creatures were just fellow passengers, but most shuddered with loathing. Specialists remain divided on how much of a health threat rats posed at sea during the Middle Ages. Some argue they were primarily nuisances, eating food stores and fouling the hold. Others point to their role as carriers of fleas, which in turn spread disease. The Black Death itself travelled in part through maritime trade. Whether sailors fully grasped the danger or not, they certainly noticed the way vermin gnawed into their already fragile supplies, reducing hard-earned rations to crumbs. You shift in your cloak now, trying to shake off the sensation of claws at your ankles. The noise continues, scratches in the beams, squeaks in the corners, the soft rustle of fur brushing against sacks of grain. You roll to your side, pulling your pelt tighter, but a rat scampers boldly across your chest before darting into the shadows. You flinch, mutter a curse, and slap at the plank, though you know it does no good. The rats always return. The smell is unmistakable too. Beneath the sour odor of hides and damp wool lies a sharp, musky tang. Rat droppings scatter across the floor, ground into the planks by boots and bodies. In daylight, men might sweep them aside with a laugh, but in the dark, they feel like proof that the ship belongs more to the vermin than to the crew. And yet, strangely, some sailors found a grim sort of comfort in their presence. Rats were hardy survivors, able to thrive in the harshest conditions. If the vermin were alive and active, perhaps it meant the ship itself still had a chance. A silent, ratless hold could feel eerie, like a warning that something was deeply wrong. Life, however unpleasant, was still life. You imagine the uneasy truce that formed. Men tucked their bread close, guarded their sacks, and cursed when gnawed holes appeared anyway. Some shared scraps deliberately, hoping to buy peace. Others set crude traps, though success was rare. And at night, when claws skittered across bodies and faces, most men simply turned away, pulling cloaks tighter and muttering oaths into the dark. Consider how different this was from land. In cottages, rats were hated, chased by cats, trapped whenever possible. At sea, cats were sometimes kept too, but not always, especially on smaller trading vessels where space and food were limited. Without natural hunters, the rat population bloomed, turning every voyage into an uneasy coexistence. The difference was stark. On land, rats were pests to be removed. At sea, they were neighbors you never invited but always had to endure. Now picture yourself again on that frozen night. You try to drift back to sleep, but the scratching won't stop. Every sound jolts you awake. Every brush of fur against your skin makes you twitch. Eventually, fatigue drags you under anyway. You dream of cats prowling decks, of soft paws silencing squeaks, of a ship without vermin. And then you wake to reality. The rats are still here, bold as ever, racing through the hold as though they own it. This was the texture of medieval sailors' nights. The cold, the damp, the noise and the company of vermin. Rats were not nightmare visitors. They were constant companions, unwelcome but unavoidable. Men learned to live with them, the way they lived with storms, frost and hunger. Disgust never faded, but endurance grew stronger. You roll over once more, cloak wrapped tight, telling yourself to ignore the scratches and squeaks. Sleep is too precious to surrender, even to vermin. The rats will keep running, the ship will keep groaning, and you will close your eyes anyway. That was survival. That was sleep on the winter sea. The ship sways gently now, calmer than during the storm, and in the uneasy hush you notice a sound that never leaves, the creaking of wood. Every timber, every beam, every nail seems to voice its complaint, like a living body shifting in its sleep. To land dwellers it might sound unnerving, a reminder of fragility, but for sailors it became a nightly lullaby, unwanted perhaps, but familiar, and eventually woven into the rhythm of rest. Contemporary accounts describe the groaning of the hull as constant, especially on long voyages. Ships were built of oak, pine, or fir, and as the waves pressed against their frames, the planks rubbed together, producing an eerie chorus of moans, squeals, and snaps. Some logs even compare the noise to a choir discordant but ceaseless. To sleep here was to surrender not to silence but to a soundtrack of creaks, like the voice of the sea itself humming through the wood. One peculiar note survives in a Genoese captain's diary. He claimed that sailors could tell the health of a ship by its nighttime creaks. A steady rhythm meant timbers were holding. A sharp crack or unfamiliar groan sent men bolting upright in dread. They joked grimly that the ship spoke in its sleep, and the wise listened closely. Imagine drifting off, only to be startled awake by a noise that might signal nothing or the first whisper of disaster. Scholars remain divided on whether men grew truly accustomed to this chorus, or whether it gnawed at them night after night. Some argue that sailors developed a kind of selective deafness, filtering the creaks into background noise. Others suggest the sounds were always unsettling, keeping men half alert, unable to sink into deep sleep. With little physical evidence, the truth is blurred, but it is certain that no sailor slept without the company of groaning wood. Picture yourself curled in your cloak, cheek pressed to a rope coil. At first, the creaking is unbearable, long, drawn-out sighs, sudden snaps, the rhythmic squeal of planks shifting with the swell. Every noise convinces you the ship is about to break apart. You shift, hold your breath, wait for the next groan. It comes, then another, and another, until they blur together. Slowly, your mind accepts the rhythm, as though the ship itself is breathing. The soundscape is rich. Beams above your head stretch and contract. Nails squeal against their holes. Ropes thrum faintly as they rub against wood. It is a symphony of strain. The darkness amplifies it, making every whisper louder. Your body tenses, then slackens again, caught between fear and exhaustion. Somewhere nearby, a fellow sailor mutters, "She sings tonight," as though the vessel's voice is a comfort, not a threat. The smell mingles with the sound. Tar and pitch seep from the seams, a sticky perfume that hangs in the air. Sawdust from repairs still lingers in cracks, dampened by spray. You breathe deeply, the odor sharp and earthy, tied inextricably to the groaning wood. Together, smell and sound become part of the ship's identity, its constant reminder that it is alive, if only barely. On land, silence or the chirping of insects might lull a person to sleep. At sea, it was wood and water. The creaking became the night's heartbeat. And like a heartbeat, it reassured as much as it unsettled. If the noise stopped entirely, that would mean something far worse. Stillness, perhaps a broken mast or a dead calm. So even as you curse the squeals, you cling to them. They mean the ship still fights, still lives. Now let your imagination drift. You are half asleep, the timber's groans rolling into your ears. The sound becomes less of a threat and more of a rhythm. Each creak aligns with your breath. Each sigh echoes your own. The ship rocks you like a cradle, the wood's voice humming you down into dreams. You dream of forests, of trees bending in wind, of leaves whispering against each other only to wake and realize the forest is now a hull, the leaves now planks, the wind now sea spray. Still, you smile faintly in the dark. The sounds are not home, but they are constant, and constancy becomes comfort. The creaking wood, once a reminder of danger, becomes your lullaby, telling you in its strange voice that the ship endures another night, and so do you. The night deepens, and though the creaking of timbers has become almost soothing, another sense refuses to let you rest. Smell. On land, winter nights might carry the smoke of hearth fires or the faint sweetness of hay. Here, below deck on a medieval ship, the air is thick, sour, and impossible to ignore. Sleep comes not into lavender-scented pillows but into a stinking fog that presses against your nostrils with every breath. Contemporary accounts of voyages remark on the foulness of shipboard air, particularly in winter when hatches were sealed to keep out icy spray. Without ventilation, the hold filled quickly with the stench of bilge water, stale food, and unwashed bodies. The bilge, the lowest part of the ship where water collected, was infamous. It brewed a mixture of salt water, rotting wood, and spilled cargo, producing an odor so sharp that men gagged when cleaning it. To sleep within a few feet of that miasma was to endure a nightly assault on the senses. One curious observation recorded by a 14th-century traveller described sailors sprinkling herbs, thyme, sage, even dried lavender brought from home into their cloaks or bedding to mask the smell. The herbs quickly lost their fragrance, but for a night or two they offered a brief illusion of freshness. Imagine the irony, clutching a sprig of thyme against your nose as you drift off, pretending for a moment that you are back in a kitchen garden rather than suffocating in a wooden box reeking of rot. Researchers still argue about the extent of food spoilage and its impact on odor below decks. Some say the tightly sealed barrels of salted fish or meat contained their smell well enough. Others point to evidence of leaks and spoiled stores, which would have turned the hold into a pungent cellar. Whatever the truth, sailors themselves complained often enough to make it clear. The stink was inescapable. You inhale in this imagined space, and it feels heavy, almost greasy. The smell coats your throat and lingers on your tongue. There's the sourness of sweat soaked into wool, the sharp tang of urine in the corners where men relieved themselves during storms, the musk of rats, the faint sweetness of mold growing on damp wood. Every breath reminds you you're trapped inside a box floating on a hostile sea. You pull your cloak over your nose, but the cloth itself reeks of salt and mildew. There is no escape. Now add the human element. Men sleeping side by side in winter rarely bathed. Water was too precious to waste on washing. Cloaks stiffened with grime, tunics stained with grease, boots caked in tar and dirt, all of it mingled into one communal smell. Some sailors joked that they could identify their shipmates by scent alone in the dark. Others muttered that they preferred the reek of tar to the stink of bodies. Either way, the mixture was unforgettable. Close your eyes and imagine trying to rest amid this. Every inhalation is a test of willpower. Your stomach churns, your nose wrinkles, but exhaustion pushes harder than disgust. Slowly, the body adapts. The stench becomes background, as the creaks of the hull did. It never vanishes, but you learn to live with it, to dream in spite of it, even to let it lull you. On land, peasants also endured strong odors, smoke-filled cottages, animal stalls under the same roof, latrines near beds of straw. Yet there was at least fresh air outside, a breeze through cracks, or the smell of fields in winter frost. At sea, trapped in a sealed hold, there was nowhere to go. The smell was not just unpleasant, it was imprisonment made tangible, a reminder that you were enclosed by wood and water with no way to escape. Some men grew superstitious about it. A sudden shift in the bilge's odor was taken as a sign of misfortune, as though the sea itself sent warnings through smell. Others insisted the stench made them sick, a belief not entirely unfounded. Poor ventilation and spoiled air likely worsened disease. When a man coughed blood, some blamed it on the foul air rather than the cold. And perhaps they were right in part. Breathing rot night after night could not have left the lungs untouched. Now imagine your own body in this hold. You press your cloak tighter around your face, searching for a pocket of air less rancid. Your head aches from the closeness of it. Your chest feels heavy, but slowly your eyelids sag. You focus on something else, the rhythm of breathing around you, the groan of the hull, even the scuttle of rats. Anything to forget the smell. And gradually, despite the foulness, sleep comes. Not because the air is kind, but because fatigue is stronger than disgust. This was the sailor's reality. Nights scented not by comfort but by survival. The stench of bilge and bodies was not an intrusion. It was the atmosphere of life at sea. And in that reeking dark, sailors dreamed of fields of lavender, clean straw beds, or fresh winds off the land. Dreams sweetened what reality spoiled, giving men the strength to endure until morning. You turn on the plank, cloak still clutched against your nose, and surrender. The smell doesn't vanish, it surrounds you, seeps into you, but at last your body drags you under. Sleep, here, is not fragrant, not peaceful, but it is still sleep, and it is enough to keep you alive for another day. The hold is restless tonight, though not with noise or vermin. Instead, you notice the murmurs, quiet voices rising in the dark, words half-spoken but heavy with meaning. Men are praying, not loudly, not in ceremony, but in the hushed way of those too weary to argue with fate. In the brutal winters at sea, faith was as essential as furs or cloaks. For many sailors, prayer became the last ritual before closing their eyes. Records show that Christian devotion was woven into every part of medieval maritime life. Ships often carried a painted image of the Virgin Mary, St. Nicholas, or a wooden crucifix lashed to the mast. Before voyages began, priests blessed the vessel, sprinkling holy water across its deck, and each night, when the cold pressed hardest and fear of storms or spirits crept close, sailors whispered prayers for safe passage. It was not formal liturgy, but survival, simple words muttered into the dark, repeated until fatigue carried the speaker into dreams. One striking anecdote comes from a Catalan voyage where a sailor carved a small cross into the beam above his sleeping spot. Each night, before lying down, he touched it 3 times, convinced it would shield him from drowning in his sleep. Others might hold a rosary bead, or simply trace the sign of the cross across their chest before pulling their cloak tight. These gestures became anchors, small comforts when warmth and quiet were impossible to find. Scholars remain divided on how much faith truly comforted sailors versus how much it was ritual born of fear. Some argue that prayer gave men genuine peace, a sense of being watched over even in the darkest holds. Others suggest it was habit more than conviction, an instinct to cling to tradition in the face of danger, even if belief was shallow. But either way, the prayers were spoken, the rituals kept, and the sea endured them silently. Now picture yourself in this dim hold. Around you, men are shifting into place, their breath visible in the cold. One murmurs the Pater Noster. Another recites the Ave Maria, his voice cracked from salt and frost. A third only whispers, "Lord, keep me till morning." The prayers rise and fall like waves, mingling with the creak of the hull. You close your eyes and join them, your lips forming words you half believe, because belief is less important than hope. The smell of tallow and mildew lingers, the rats scratch, the cold bites, but the act of prayer draws your mind elsewhere. You imagine saints watching, angels guarding the ship, God himself steering the rudder unseen. For a moment, the sea feels less cruel. For a moment, you are not just a body fighting for warmth, but a soul, part of something larger. In some regions, sailors added their own folk rituals. A German account tells of men whispering charms against nightmares, repeating rhymed verses meant to keep spirits at bay. Others clutched amulets, small bones, coins, or shells, believing they held protective power. Faith and superstition blurred together, each serving the same purpose: to create a sense of control where none truly existed. Think of the rhythm of these nights. Work ended, meals were swallowed in haste, and then, before sleep, came prayer. Sometimes together, sometimes alone, always whispered into the dark. It was a ritual as predictable as the toll of the watch bell, and though no miracle warmed the air or silenced the storms, sailors still believed or wanted to believe that their words mattered. Now let yourself join the moment fully. You whisper a prayer, fingers stiff but tracing the cross anyway. Your breath clouds in the lamplight, rising with the murmurs of the others. Slowly, the rhythm of prayer blends with the rhythm of the ship. Creak, groan, sigh, mutter, whisper. Your body relaxes despite the cold. You know the sea may still rage tomorrow, but for tonight, you've handed your fear to something beyond yourself. That act alone eases the weight enough for sleep. On land, peasants prayed too before sleeping, kneeling by straw beds or hearth fires. But the difference is sharp. Ashore, the prayer felt like gratitude for safety. At sea, it was plea, petition, and desperate bargain. The waves pressed so close that sailors prayed not for blessings but for survival. You tuck your cloak tighter and close your eyes. Around you, the voices fall quiet one by one, the prayers trailing into snores, yet their echo remains in your ears, lingering like a lullaby of faith. The ship creaks, the rats scuttle, but you feel steadier than before. Sleep comes not as surrender but as trust, a fragile trust that your whispered words might carry across waves, reaching ears that can hold you safe until dawn. The prayers fade into silence, and you notice another rhythm aboard the ship, the unspoken hierarchy of who sleeps where. Not all men endure the same misery. Even in the belly of a medieval vessel, rank had its privileges, and the distance between an officer's rest and a common sailor's slumber could be as wide as the gulf between sea and land. Contemporary records show that captains and high-ranking officers often claimed the stern castle or a private cabin. These spaces were hardly luxurious, cramped, damp, and rattled by every wave, but compared to the hold, they were a palace. Officers had beds or bunks fitted against the walls, sometimes with curtains to hold in warmth and grant privacy. A mattress stuffed with straw or feathers might soften their sleep, and wool blankets, thicker and cleaner than the common cloak, gave some measure of comfort. By contrast, the men below lay on bare planks, salted hides, and their own stiffened garments. An odd glimpse into this contrast comes from a Venetian account, where an officer bragged of sipping warm wine before bed, while the sailors huddled in the dark, gnawing stale bread. Imagine hearing that tale below deck, your stomach growling, your teeth chattering, while above you someone stretches out beneath a curtain, full-bellied and warm. The resentment must have been sharp, though seldom voiced aloud. Survival demanded obedience, even if bitterness burned quietly in the dark. Researchers still disagree on how wide this gap of privilege truly was. Some argue that many officers endured conditions little better than their men, with only a small curtain or extra blanket to set them apart. Others believe that the difference was more dramatic, especially on wealthier trading vessels or state-sponsored fleets, where officers had access to stores of wine, softer bedding, and even personal servants. Whatever the case, the principle is clear: rank shaped sleep, even in the most brutal winter nights. You can feel it if you imagine yourself now. You are below deck, shoulder to shoulder with fellow sailors, breath clouding in the cold. Your blanket is a crusted cloak, your pillow, a coil of rope, your lullaby the squeak of rats. But above you, in a chamber you will never see, a captain reclines on a straw mattress, a lantern casting warm light across carved beams. His snores are muffled by distance, his body swaddled in clean wool. The same sea rocks you both, but the experience could not be more different. This hierarchy shaped more than comfort. It shaped morale. Some sailors accepted the divide as natural, believing officers had earned their privileges through knowledge and command. Others bristled quietly, nursing resentment in the long watches. Whispers of unfairness sometimes simmered into mutiny, especially when rations grew short or punishment grew harsh. The unequal sleep arrangements became one more reminder of who held power and who bore the cost of obedience. On land, peasants might envy lords who slept in feather beds before roaring hearths. At sea, the comparison was compressed into a few planks of wood, officers above, sailors below. The ship itself was a microcosm of the world, its walls holding hierarchy as firmly as rope held sails. Picture the sensory contrast. In the cabin above, a curtain flutters faintly, warmed by a candle's glow. The air smells of wax and wool, perhaps even faint traces of spiced wine. The officer stretches out, sighs, and sinks into dream. Meanwhile, you cough in the hold, the stink of bilge in your nose, the cold pressing against your chest. Your comrade shifts beside you, elbow knocking into your ribs. You mutter and pull your cloak tighter. You tell yourself that sleep is sleep no matter where it finds you, though bitterness hums in your veins. And yet, some men found comfort in camaraderie rather than envy. The officer might have privacy, but he also had solitude. Down below, for all the stench and closeness, you had company. The man beside you might elbow you, but he would also share his last scrap of bread. He would cough into the dark, but he would also cover you with half his cloak if frost grew too sharp. Sleep may have been poorer here, but it was shared and shared. Suffering created bonds no officer's mattress could provide. You shift in your place, cloaked and stiff, but glance at your comrades. Their faces glow faintly in the lamplight, worn but steady. You realize you would rather be here, among them, than alone above, no matter the bedding. The cold binds you together, the hierarchy divides you, but in the end, every man must face the same sea. So you close your eyes, muttering at the unfairness one last time, then surrender to exhaustion. Above, the captain dreams on straw. Below, you dream on planks. Both dreams belong to the sea, and both will break at the next toll of the watch bell. The ship drifts into calmer waters, and for once the night passes without storm or shouting. Dawn begins to bleed across the horizon, a faint grey light slipping through cracks in the deck above. For the sailors below, it means something precious. Landfall is near. Not home, rarely home, but a port, a place where solid ground and fleeting comforts await. After weeks of cramped sleep, brutal cold, and verminous company, even a draughty inn or noisy tavern felt like paradise. Travel journals and port records confirm that sailors looked forward most of all to the chance of sleeping ashore. Inns near harbours often did brisk business, their straw mattresses worn thin by constant turnover of men desperate for rest. The beds were seldom clean, and fleas often nestled in the rushes, but compared to the salt-crusted planks of a ship, they were bliss. Some sailors even pooled their coin to share a mattress, stretching out in warmth they could never find aboard. One quirky little detail emerges from English port records. Certain taverns kept rooms specifically for sailors, where instead of beds, they offered great piles of hay in lofts above the common hall. Men would climb ladders, collapse into the straw, and snore in chorus while drinking songs still roared below. It was rough, itchy, and noisy, but the sense of ground beneath them, unmoving and firm, made it feel luxurious. A man could dream more deeply when the earth wasn't shifting under him. Specialists remain divided on how restorative these portside rests truly were. Some argue that even a single night on a real mattress, near a hearth, revived sailors enough to face weeks more at sea. Others caution that the cheap wine, revelry, and overcrowded lodgings often left men no better rested hungover, bitten by fleas, and staggering back to the ship at dawn. Both may be true. The relief was real, but fleeting, swallowed again by the sea. Now imagine yourself stumbling through a harbour street at twilight. The smell of fish and smoke fills the air, but so does the scent of bread baking, something you haven't known for weeks. You duck into an inn, coins jingling in your pouch. The innkeeper leads you upstairs to a low-ceilinged loft where straw mattresses lie in rows. You drop your bundle, collapse into the straw, and for the first time in months, the ground does not move. The stillness is a miracle. You laugh softly, burying your face in the musty bedding, and already your eyes are closing. Compare this with the captain's experience. He may lodge in a merchant's guest house, sleeping in a feather bed, sipping mulled wine by a fire, but even his luxury cannot compare to your joy in simple stillness. After so many nights rocked by the sea, the absence of motion is wealth itself. The sounds are different too. Instead of the groan of timbers, you hear muffled songs from the tavern below, laughter spilling through the floorboards. Instead of the slap of waves, you hear a dog bark in the street, the clop of hooves on cobblestones. These noises, though loud, soothe you. They are reminders of land, of civilization, of a world beyond the sea. The smells change as well. No bilge, no rat musk, just smoke, beer, and food. Even if the straw stinks faintly of animals, it is still sweeter than the reek of damp planks. You draw a deep breath, feeling your chest expand without the taste of salt clinging to your tongue. For a moment, you feel human again. And yet, the reprieve is brief. You know you will soon return to the ship, to the groans and draughts, the cold and the cramped bodies. The memory of this night will sustain you, but it will also haunt you. Tomorrow, as you curl once more on planks, you will remember the stillness of ground, the smell of smoke, the sound of laughter. The contrast will bite sharper than the frost. But for now, you surrender. The straw scratches, but it doesn't matter. You sprawl, stretch your limbs wide, and feel space around you, something absent at sea. You roll onto your back, gaze at the rafters above, and smile faintly. This night is not perfect, but it is yours, and it is enough to remind you what comfort feels like. You close your eyes, and for once, sleep comes not as a battle, but as a gift. The sweetness of land never lasts. Before long, you're back aboard, back to the sway of the hull and the cold draughts that creep through every seam. And with the return to sea comes the same nightly struggle: how to quiet a restless body, how to coax a mind worn thin by labor into surrender. Medieval sailors, like peasants ashore, turned often to remedies, some practical, some superstitious, some laughably desperate for their sleeplessness. Contemporary accounts reveal that herbs were a common ally. Sailors carried bundles of dried plants from their home villages, chamomile to calm nerves, valerian to soothe aches, or even mint to freshen the stale air of the hold. A sprig tucked into a cloak might not truly induce sleep, but the familiar scent could comfort a man far from home. Herbal brews, when water was available, offered stronger effect, though more often, ale served as the chosen draught. Alcohol dulled the senses, blurred the discomfort, and tricked weary bodies into slumber, even if it left heads aching by dawn. One odd detail appears in a French mariner's journal. He claimed that tying garlic cloves to one's belt warded off nightmares. The logic was part medicine, part magic. Garlic was believed to fight illness and evil alike. Men laughed at the smell, but some swore it kept their dreams free from the black shapes that haunted the night. Imagine a hold thick with the odor of garlic on top of bilge and tar. Unpleasant? Absolutely. But if it eased a sailor's mind enough to close his eyes, it was worth it. There's still lively debate among historians about whether sailors carried formal remedies supplied by captains or relied solely on their own traditions. Some ship inventories list small quantities of medicinal herbs, perhaps intended for officers or emergency use. Others suggest that common sailors improvised, using whatever plants they could trade for in ports, combining them with charms and rituals brought from home. The truth likely varied from voyage to voyage, a patchwork of folk medicine stitched together with stubbornness. Picture the hold in this moment. A sailor beside you chews dried valerian root, grimacing at its bitterness. Another sips from a flask of ale, his eyelids already heavy. A third mutters as he ties a sprig of rosemary to his wrist, believing it will calm his dreams. The air smells pungent garlic, herbs, Stale beer, but the ritual brings reassurance. Each man clings to his method as though it were armor against the restless dark. You might try one yourself. You chew a leaf of mint, its sharpness cutting through the stench around you. For a brief moment, your mouth feels cool, clean. The taste anchors you, reminding you of gardens and markets, of land and soil. You close your eyes, breathing in the faint aroma, and though the planks beneath you are as hard as ever, your mind softens, edges blurred by the simple ritual. The remedies weren't always physical. Some sailors trusted charms, small tokens carved from wood, scraps of parchment with prayers, or knotted cords said to bind nightmares. Others believed in sleeping in a certain position, facing east or curling with their heads toward the bow, aligning body and ship with luck. Still others relied on sheer exhaustion, working themselves to collapse, so that when they finally lay down, no thought or fear could hold them awake. On land, peasants relied on similar folk cures. Herbs steeped in broth, charms hung over beds, prayers whispered before sleep. But the difference was scale. At home, remedies were supported by hearth fires and straw beds. At sea, they fought against rats, frost, noise, and the smell of rot. It was like using a candle to hold back the tide. Yet even the smallest flame can give hope, and so men clung to their tricks. Imagine yourself in this hold, a sprig of sage tucked into your cloak, the faint taste of ale on your tongue. Around you, men shift, sigh, and settle. Some cough, others hum softly, still others mumble prayers. You clutch your charm, breathe deeply, and let the herb's scent mix with the sea's reek. It isn't magic, not really. But for tonight, you believe enough to let it work. Slowly, your eyelids sink. Your body aches, but your mind releases its grip. This is the strange resilience of the human spirit, the ability to convince itself of comfort where none exists. Garlic against nightmares, ale against fear, herbs against exhaustion, all half measures perhaps, but enough. Because at sea, enough was all anyone could hope for. And so you drift off, surrounded by smells pungent and sharp, by whispers of charms and faith, by the endless creak of the ship. Remedies old and new fade into background, and sleep shallow, fragile, but sleep nonetheless wraps itself around you once more. The bell has tolled again, though this time it carries a different note, the promise of dawn. You stir from your shallow dreams, cloak stiff around your shoulders, body aching in every joint. The air is no warmer than when you fell asleep, but the faint grey light leaking through the hatch tells you the night is over. On medieval ships, mornings after a frozen night were less a fresh beginning than a slow, painful uncoiling of stiff bodies. Chronicles and sailors' letters describe the morning routine vividly. Men woke shivering, their limbs so cold and cramped they could barely stand. Salt-encrusted clothes, worn through the night for warmth, were pulled tighter and stiffened further by frost. Breath misted in the hold, turning the air into a fog of shared discomfort. Some men groaned aloud as they rose. Others muttered prayers of thanks, simply for surviving the night. One striking little note survives in a northern account. Sailors sometimes cracked sheets of ice off their garments before beginning the day's labor. Imagine pulling on boots only to find them frozen stiff, beating them against the planks to soften them enough for your feet. Cloaks left damp overnight could freeze into awkward shapes, forcing men to drape them stiff as boards around their shoulders. A comical image in daylight, perhaps, but in that bitter dawn it was only another trial. Specialists remain divided on whether sailors were given hot food or drink in the mornings. Some argue that broth or warmed ale might have been served when possible, providing a burst of heat after long hours of cold. Others believe such comforts were rare, limited to ports or well-supplied ships. What most agree on is that mornings were grueling, stiff muscles, frozen hands, and tasks that began immediately, long before the sun brought even a hint of warmth. You climb the ladder in this vision, boots crunching against frost. The deck greets you with a blast of air sharp as knives. The horizon is a smear of pale gold, but the wind is merciless, biting your cheeks, stinging your eyes. You tug your cloak tighter, wishing for mittens you don't have, flexing your fingers in a futile attempt to stir blood into them. Around you, other men shuffle, teeth chattering, cursing softly under their breath. The smell of salt is overwhelming, mixed with the sour musk of unwashed clothes. The ship itself seems to sigh as if exhausted too, its timbers creaking beneath the weight of frost. Ice clings to the rigging, glinting faintly in the dawn light. Sailors scrape at it with knives, their hands red and raw, while others haul frozen ropes stiff as iron. The work begins instantly, without pause for warmth or complaint. At sea, survival leaves no room for delay. You notice how fatigue lingers in every face. No one truly slept. They merely endured the night. Eyes are sunken, skin pale, lips cracked from the cold. A man coughs blood-tinged phlegm into the sea, while another clutches his side, wincing from a night spent on unforgiving planks. And yet, they keep moving. Duty outweighs comfort. Habit outweighs pain. The sea has trained them to rise no matter how broken they feel. In contrast, think of mornings ashore. A peasant might wake on straw, stretch beside a hearth, and tend a fire before stepping into the cold. A sailor wakes to frost already in his lungs, his first act to fight ropes or ice, not to sip warmth. The difference is cruel, yet it defined their lives. Sea and land did not just hold different landscapes, they held different rhythms of survival. Now return below deck in your imagination. The men who remain there huddle, reluctant to rise. They rub their hands together, blow into them, slap their arms across their chests. Some mutter that they would sell their souls for a bowl of hot broth. Others joke bitterly, comparing their cloaks to armor made of ice. Laughter cuts through the gloom for a moment, but it fades quickly under the weight of reality. Even so, there are small mercies. Sometimes, the galley fire is lit, carefully guarded to prevent sparks from spreading. A pot of thin pottage or warmed beer makes its way among the crew, ladled into wooden cups. The heat stings your throat, scalds your tongue, but the warmth is heavenly. For a few minutes, your body forgets the frost and remembers what comfort tastes like. You sip, sigh, and lean against the planks. Your body is still stiff, but the warmth spreads slowly through your chest. Around you, men grow quieter, eyes softening as they drink. This is the closest thing to peace the morning offers, a stolen moment of heat, fragile but real. Soon, the work will call again, but for now, you breathe deeply and let your muscles relax. And then it's time. The bell tolls, orders bark, and the ship shakes itself into life. You set down your cup, pull your cloak tighter, and rise. Dawn has come, but warmth has not. The sea demands its due once more, and you follow, weary yet unbroken, carrying the memory of fragile rest into another day. The frostbitten morning has passed, and you find yourself wondering, how different was it for those who never set foot on a ship? If you could slip into the mind of a peasant on land, or a shepherd guarding his flock in winter, would his nights feel the same as yours, cold, restless, and thin? Or was there a comfort ashore that sailors could only dream of? Comparing the two worlds reveals not just differences of circumstance, but a deeper contrast between earth and sea. Chronicles and manorial records make it clear that peasants in Europe also slept poorly during the harshest winters. A thatched cottage did little to block the cold winds, and many families huddled together in one room, often with animals close by for warmth. Beds were straw pallets laid on the floor, sometimes shared by parents, children, and servants all together. Fire was the greatest blessing. Even a small hearth could soften the night chill. Sailors knew no such luxury. They might dream of a smoky cottage, yet the sea denied them flame, allowing only lanterns that warmed nothing. An unusual little note survives from a 13th-century English manor roll. It describes a family lining their bed with dried bracken leaves, said to hold warmth longer than straw. Imagine peasants shifting on their crackling bedding, hearing the winter wind batter the shutters, while outside livestock exhaled clouds of steam in the dark. Rough, yes, but compared to a ship's hold, the scene feels almost gentle, almost kind. Scholars continue to debate whether sailors envied peasants' lives or considered them equally harsh. Some argue that mariners pitied villagers tied to fields, imagining freedom in the open sea. Others believe the opposite, that men cursed their fate afloat and longed for a cottage hearth. The truth is elusive, but the contrast is sharp. Both lives were brutal, but in different ways. Land offered steadiness. Sea offered endless motion. Picture yourself now lying on a ship's plank, cloak stiff with salt. The cold creeps upward through wood, seeping into your back. You imagine instead a peasant's pallet straw pricking your skin, but a fire glowing nearby, smoke curling lazily above. The smell would be of wood smoke and hay, not bilge and tar. Perhaps a child kicks in his sleep, or a sheep bleats faintly from the corner. It is not luxury, but it is home, and you feel the ache of longing sharper than the frost itself. The sounds too differ greatly. On land you might hear the wind through trees, the creak of shutters, a dog barking at shadows. At sea the noises are harsher, groaning timbers, snapping sails, the endless slap of water. Land's sounds reassure, sea's sounds remind you constantly of peril. And yet, after months aboard, a sailor might grow uneasy ashore. The stillness of earth could feel uncanny, the silence unsettling. Rest on land might be too quiet, too strange, after nights cradled in noise. And then there is food. A peasant might go to bed with a belly heavy from pottage or bread, even if coarse and simple. Sailors often lay down hungry, their salted rations unappealing or spoiled. Dreams ashore were filled with satiety. Dreams at sea were filled with yearning. It is not difficult to guess which made waking easier. You roll to your side in the imagined hold, pulling your cloak tighter. You tell yourself a story of a cottage, of warmth, of straw rustling under your body instead of hard planks. The picture soothes you for a moment, but the illusion falters as the ship rocks, as the smell of bilge intrudes, as the cold stiffens your cloak again. The sea won't let you pretend long. Still, comparisons gave sailors perspective. They cursed their fate, yes, but they also took pride. Any man could endure a cottage winter. It took sailors to endure the sea. Their sleep, broken and bitter, became a badge of resilience, proof that they belonged to a brotherhood stronger than frost and waves. They might envy peasants, but they also considered themselves tougher than peasants could ever be. And so, as you drift again into uneasy rest, you carry both thoughts, the longing for land's hearth and the pride of sea's hardship. Your dreams mingle the two worlds, a cottage bed rocking gently, a ship's plank warmed by fire. Neither exists, but in your imagination, both soften the night. The day at sea drags on, bitter winds numbing your hands, ropes stiff with ice fighting every pull. But when the sun dips low and the ship steadies into a rare calm, a curious opportunity appears. The deck, usually a place of labor, becomes for some sailors a place of stolen rest. In winter, the idea of sleeping above was risky, yet, in the weak light of day, when work slowed and the air held a fragile stillness, men sometimes curled into corners to catch a nap beneath the pale Sunday. Contemporary descriptions of voyages mention these snatched moments of rest. Sailors would slump against a coil of rope, heads bent forward, or lie flat across the deck with arms crossed over their chests. These naps seldom lasted long. A shout from an officer, the crack of a sail, or the slap of spray was enough to wake them. But even a quarter hour of dozing could refresh a body exhausted by nights of frost and broken watches. One quirky account from a Hanseatic logbook describes sailors lying in rows like seals, bellies pressed against sun-warmed planks, sighing with pleasure as though they were bathing in heat. The detail is almost comic. Men half frozen all night, suddenly sprawled out like lazy animals the moment the sun offered mercy. For a short while, dignity mattered less than warmth. There is still lively debate among historians about how common these naps were. Some suggest that discipline aboard stricter naval vessels forbade any idleness on deck. Others argue that on merchant ships, especially when seas were calm, Officers tolerated brief rests, knowing fatigue could endanger the whole crew. What is certain is that men seized any chance, however fleeting, to let their bodies collapse into stillness. Imagine yourself in this moment. The sea is calm, the air crisp, but no longer brutal. You stretch out along the deck, cheek pressed against the wood warmed faintly by the winter Sunday. It isn't much, but compared to the icy hold, the planks feel like a heated bench. You close your eyes, and the light seeps through your lids, a red glow softening the world. For once, the creak of the ship is not a menace but a lull, a rhythm that rocks you gently. The sounds are different here. Instead of snores and coughs, you hear gulls wheeling overhead, the soft slap of water against the hull, the murmur of men speaking low. These noises are almost pastoral, reminding you of land, of rivers, of fields. You sigh, stretch your legs, and drift into half sleep, the cold momentarily forgotten. But risks linger. A sudden wave might drench you, soaking cloak and boots in icy brine. An officer might bark you awake, demanding work. And there is always the danger of rolling in your sleep, sliding across the slick planks, perhaps even tumbling overboard. For this reason, many nappers lashed themselves lightly with rope, tying a wrist or ankle to a cleat. The image is strange, a sailor snoozing like a child, tethered to keep him safe. Yet it was practical, and practicality ruled life at sea. The smell on deck is kinder too. Fresh air, tinged with salt, fills your lungs after the suffocating stench below. You inhale deeply, grateful for its sharpness. Even the tang of tar and pitch feels clean compared to the bilge's rot. The deck nap becomes more than rest. It is a reminder of what breathing should feel like. On land, peasants often napped in the fields during winter afternoons, huddling in cloaks against the pale Sunday. The parallel is striking, both farmer and sailor stealing warmth where they could, bodies stretched on earth or deck, both vulnerable to wind yet grateful for stillness. The difference, of course, was that the farmer's land never threatened to swallow him whole. At sea, every nap was stolen against the will of the waves. You curl tighter against the deck, cloak pulled over your head to block the wind. The warmth seeps slowly into your bones, enough to make your muscles unclench. For once, the world is quiet enough to let you slip into a deeper sleep. Your dreams are simple, not of hearths or feasts, but of lying here without being woken, of stillness that lasts more than minutes. But inevitably, the reprieve ends. A shout comes from the rigging, or the bell tolls, and you jolt upright, stiff and groggy. The sun is already slipping west, and the cold rushes back. You stand, brush frost from your cloak, and return to duty. The nap is over, but it has given you something precious, a reminder that even in winter's cruelty, the sea sometimes offers a moment of gentleness. This is how sailors endured, by snatching rest wherever it appeared, by letting even the pale sun feel like a gift. Sleep did not belong to them. They stole it, cherished it, and returned to the ropes with heavy limbs and lighter spirits. And so, as the day wanes, you carry the warmth of your stolen nap back into the endless rhythm of watches, grateful for the brief mercy of the Sunday. Night settles once more, and as you roll yourself tight in your cloak, you notice how some men shift differently. Not everyone curls on planks or sprawls on rope coils. A few sailors, clever or lucky, build makeshift sleeping spaces, ingenious little shelters cobbled together from whatever scraps the ship allows. In winter, these improvisations could mean the difference between waking with frozen joints or waking with a body that could still work. It is documented in merchant logs and travelers' accounts that sailors frequently turned cargo into bedding. Barrels stacked in the hold became walls. Sails folded thick became mattresses. Spare rope coils served as cushions. Some even stretched canvas between beams to create hammocks of sorts. Not the elegant naval hammocks of later centuries, but crude slings that lifted their bodies a few inches from the damp planks. Though rough, these contraptions spared them from bilge water and biting draughts. A curious detail from a Scandinavian record describes sailors propping planks across barrels, then covering them with animal hides to fashion raised bunks. The result was lopsided, unstable, and creaked like a drunken mule, but at least it kept the sleeper away from rats and moisture. Imagine balancing yourself carefully on such a contraption, every shift of the ship threatening to dump you back into the muck. Still, a shaky bunk might have felt like heaven compared to icy wood beneath your spine. Scholars continue to argue about how widespread these improvised solutions were. Some insist that hammocks or raised bunks were rare luxuries, reserved for officers or the most resourceful sailors. Others suggest that nearly every crewman experimented with tricks, using ropes and cloth to claim whatever scrap of comfort they could. The evidence is uneven, but the ingenuity is undeniable. Human beings, no matter how poor or desperate, will always try to make their sleep softer. Picture yourself now as one of these lucky innovators. You've rigged a rough sling between two beams with a spare piece of canvas. The cloth smells sharply of tar and salt, stiff from months of spray, but when you ease yourself into it, your body lifts away from the frozen deck. You sway gently, rocked by the ship's motion, almost as though the sea itself is cradling you. For the first time in weeks, you feel the damp recede, the cold biting only your nose and fingers instead of your whole frame. The sounds are different here too. Raised off the planks, you hear the groan of timbers more distantly, muffled by the air beneath you. Rats scurry below, but they do not brush your face or nip at your boots. You sigh, shifting into the canvas, and let your muscles unknot slightly. The sway is strange, but after a few minutes it soothes you, lulling you towards sleep with a rhythm that feels almost kind. Others in the hold glance at you with envy, muttering jokes. "Look at him swinging like a lord," someone grumbles. Another chuckles. "He'll tip himself into the bilge before morning." You laugh too because the contraption may very well fail. But for tonight, you feel clever, almost rich, lifted just enough to imagine comfort. The smell of the hold still surrounds you, tar, mildew, sweat, but in your sling it feels a little less oppressive. You tuck your cloak around yourself and breathe slowly, imagining that you're not in a ship at all but in some strange bed built in the rafters of a barn. The dream grows stronger with every minute of warmth you manage to trap in your cocoon. On land, peasants also improvised in winter, laying straw thicker, hanging cloth against drafts, or sleeping in haylofts above animals to steal their heat. The instinct is the same. Take what the environment offers and twist it into survival. Sailors simply had fewer materials: rope, canvas, barrels, hides, and so their inventions carried the scent of the sea rather than of fields. And yet, not all improvisations were safe. There are stories of men tumbling from raised planks during storms, cracking ribs or worse. One legend tells of a sailor who built a hammock so precarious it spilled him straight into the bilge, where he nearly drowned in foul water before comrades dragged him out. The joke lasted for weeks, but the fear lingered too. Still, the risk was worth it. To be lifted from the planks was to escape the worst of the cold and damp, to dream without rats brushing your cheek, to feel for a short time as though you had carved out a corner of dignity. It was proof that even on the most brutal nights, a little ingenuity could steal back some humanity from the sea. You shift in your sling, cloak pulled close, and close your eyes. The hold hums with snores, coughs, and whispers, but you sway gently, rocked not by misery but by your own invention. Sleep comes easier here. Dreams carry you not into cottages or taverns this time, but into the strange satisfaction of survival, of having tricked the sea, if only for a night. And when you wake, stiff but not frozen, you smile faintly. The planks below are still hard, the cold still cruel, but you know you've found a way to rest. Improvisation has given you something priceless, not comfort, but enough relief to endure another day. The canvas sling creaks as you climb out, feet touching the frozen planks once more. Morning brings no mercy. The cold gnaws, the ropes stiffen, and the watch bell rings as though it enjoys your misery. But winter voyages did not last forever. There came times when the ship pressed into southern waters, or found itself in a gentler season, and with warmth came a very different kind of sleep. To understand how sailors endured brutal cold, you must also imagine the strange relief when the frost finally broke. Records from Mediterranean voyages tell us that warmth at sea changed everything. Sailors stripped layers, spread sails and clothing to dry, and lay on deck in the open air to rest. Instead of huddling like animals beneath hides, they sprawled like lizards under the sundae. Sleep no longer meant curling into a tight knot for survival, it meant stretching wide, bodies uncoiling, limbs slack with comfort. The change was so dramatic that some accounts describe sailors laughing aloud at the novelty of feeling heat on their skin while drifting into slumber. One peculiar detail comes from a Genoese chronicle. Sailors on summer voyages sometimes slept naked on deck, their clothes hung on lines around them to dry. The sight of an entire crew stretched out unclothed beneath the stars must have been equal parts comical and serene. For men used to winter's cruelty, the chance to let their skin breathe was intoxicating. Of course, risks remained: sunburn by day, sudden squalls by night, but for those hours, comfort was real. Specialists still puzzle over how these moments of warmth shaped morale. Some argue that southern voyages allowed sailors to recover from the toll of colder journeys, strengthening both body and spirit. Others suggest that too much comfort bred laxity, dulling the discipline forged in hardship. Perhaps both were true, depending on the crew. What is certain is that warmth transformed sleep from a battle into a pleasure, rare and deeply cherished. Imagine yourself now lying on the deck, cloak set aside, the wood beneath you warm from a day's Sunday. Your back presses into it and feels not pain, but comfort. The air smells different, too less of rot and bilge, more of salt mingled with herbs and spices carried on southern winds. You breathe deeply, chest rising in steady rhythm, as gulls cry above. The sea's slap against the hull is no longer menace but music. The difference strikes you most in the body. In winter, every muscle remained tense, curled tight against frost. Now, your limbs loosen, your fingers splay open, your jaw unclenches. Sleep flows into you easily, not fought for but welcomed. You dream not of hearth fires or stolen warmth, but of stars overhead, of waves glittering silver. It is as though the sea itself has shifted from enemy to friend. Contrast this with land life again. In summer, peasants also found ease in warmth, stretching on straw pallets by open windows, letting breezes carry them to sleep. But their nights could be sweltering, insects biting, air heavy with heat. At sea, though warmth could be fierce by day, the night often brought cool winds, allowing sailors to rest more easily under stars. For once, the sea seemed generous. Still, dangers lingered. A sudden gust could topple a dozing sailor, rolling him across the deck. A squall could drench men before they stirred. And in southern waters, insects or unfamiliar pests could bite, leaving rashes or fevers. Comfort was real, but never absolute. Even in warmth, sailors learned to keep one eye half open, one ear tuned to the bell. You shift in your imagined dream, hearing the murmur of men around you. They joke softly, their voices lighter than in winter. A man sings a verse of a tavern song, another hums along. The sound is not desperate this time, but playful. The hold below, with its frost and bilge, feels far away. Tonight, sleep is almost like it is on land, free, soft, without fear. And yet, you know it will not last. Winter will return, or storms will rise, or the voyage will press north again into icy winds. But for now, in this fragile season, sailors take what they can. They stretch wide, laugh loud, and let their bodies sink deeply into rest. Sleep becomes not a survival tactic but a genuine joy, rare enough to be remembered for years. You close your eyes one final time, lying on warm planks, stars glittering above. The sea breathes gently beneath you, and for the first time in months you smile as you drift away. The memory of this night will carry you through the next frost, the next storm, the next bitter watch, because once the sea was kind, and once you slept like a child beneath its stars. The warmth of southern seas fades in memory as your vessel pushes north again, where nights grow long and the horizon hides behind curtains of mist. With the return of cold comes another hardship of shipboard sleep: sickness. If the biting draughts and foul odours did not rouse you, the cough of a crewmate surely did. On a medieval ship in winter, illness spread quickly through cramped quarters, turning the hold into a dormitory of fevers, groans, and uneasy dreams. Contemporary letters and chronicles record how respiratory ailments, coughs, chills, even lung fevers were rampant aboard. The sealed air below deck, heavy with damp, became a breeding ground for infection. Men slept shoulder to shoulder, breathing each other's breath, with no way to separate the sick from the healthy. The result was inevitable. Once one sailor fell ill, a chorus of coughs followed within days. One peculiar note comes from a German trading voyage, where the writer complained that sleep was as if in a stable of sick oxen. He described men coughing so hard they rolled from their pallets, others spitting phlegm into buckets that tipped and spilled across the planks. Yet, strangely, he remarked that sailors still managed to laugh between fits, mocking each other's wheezing as though humour itself could ease the misery. Specialists remain divided on how deadly these illnesses were. Some suggest that most were common colds and chills, uncomfortable but rarely fatal. Others argue that pneumonia and consumption, what we now call tuberculosis, claimed many lives, masked in records by vague terms like weakness or lung rot. The lack of clarity leaves debate open, but all agree that sickness coloured every winter voyage. Imagine yourself curled on a plank, half asleep, when a violent cough explodes beside your ear. You flinch, tug your cloak higher, but another man hacks across the hold, then another. The sound becomes relentless, echoing against the timbers. Each burst rattles the air like a hammer. You try to drift back under, but the coughing never stops. It is as though the ship itself is trying to expel its lungs. The smell deepens too. Spit buckets fill, sour and fetid, their contents sloshing with each roll of the ship. Cloths, soaked in sweat and fever, are draped across bodies, never washed, adding to the reek. You pull your cloak tight around your face, but even your own breath tastes tainted. The air feels thick, like it carries illness itself, seeping into your lungs with every inhale. Some sailors turned again to remedies. Garlic was chewed, onions sliced and worn around necks, herbs boiled when water allowed. Others relied on charms, crosses, traced on chests, whispered prayers against fevers. Still, most simply endured, coughing through the night until exhaustion dragged them into fitful half-sleep. Dreams blurred with sickness, visions of burning lungs, of waves that seemed to cough with them, of fires they could not reach. On land, families suffered winter sickness too, but cottages allowed for some separation, children bundled together, elders near the fire. At sea, there was no escape, no warmth, no space. Illness was communal, shared as intimately as bread or prayer. Sleep became collective suffering, each man's cough stealing rest from the others, binding them in misery. Picture yourself trying to rest amid this. Your neighbour's chest rattles like a broken drum, his breath hot against your cheek. Another man wheezes so loudly it sounds like the ship's timbers are splitting. You shift, curse under your breath, but where can you go? The hold is packed, the cold relentless, the sickness everywhere. You close your eyes anyway, whispering a plea to God or fate that you wake still breathing come morning. And sometimes, men did not wake. A body grown silent overnight would be carried above, prayed over briefly, and consigned to the sea. The splash echoed back down into the hold, a grim reminder that sleep and death were sometimes separated by no more than a cough's breadth. Yet still, men found resilience. They laughed at each other's wheezing, sang hoarse songs to cover the sound, shared herbs or scraps of cloth for comfort. Even sickness could not wholly steal their camaraderie. In the dark, you hear a man joke that the sea itself must have caught their cold, groaning with them each night. The others chuckle weakly, and for a moment the misery feels lighter. You roll onto your side, cloak pulled close, and focus on that laughter instead of the coughing. It doesn't cure the sickness, but it softens the night, carrying you into shallow dreams. In those dreams, the air is clear, your chest strong, your companions silent and restful. You smile faintly in sleep, even as the real hold around you rattles with illness. The coughing fades in your ears as you drift again, but something else stirs you awake. The weight of dreams, not the kind born of comfort, but of exhaustion, hunger, and fear. On a medieval ship in the grip of winter, sleep did not always bring rest. It often carried nightmares, vivid and unsettling, that sailors believed were shaped by the sea itself. Contemporary sailors' tales remind us that dreams were taken seriously. Many men thought of them as omens, signs sent by God or spirits, warning of storms or deaths to come. A dream of drowning could chill an entire crew, while a dream of land might spark hope. In the long dark of northern winters, when minds were strained by cold and bodies by hunger, these dreams grew sharper, more haunting, until men whispered them to each other in the morning like prophecies. One peculiar account comes from a Flemish voyage where several sailors claim to dream the same image: a black bird perched on the mast, silent but staring. Within a week, a storm nearly wrecked the ship. The men swore their dreams had foretold it, and from then on they avoided even mentioning birds at night, lest the omen return. Was it coincidence, suggestion, or fear shaping memory? Historians still puzzle over such accounts, unsure how much was belief and how much was imagination stretched thin by hardship. You imagine yourself in this hold, wrapped in a stiff cloak, the draught slipping across your cheek. Your mind drifts despite the noise, and suddenly you dream of waves taller than towers, crashing down with the roar of beasts. You wake, gasping, convinced water has poured into the hold. It hasn't, but your heart pounds, and your body trembles as though you've nearly drowned. Around you, men stir too, whispering their own visions. Some laugh them off, others mutter prayers. The line between dream and prophecy feels dangerously thin. The body shapes these visions as much as the mind. Hunger twists dreams into feasts so vivid you can taste the bread. Cold weaves visions of hearths, flames licking warmly at shadows. Fatigue births hallucinations where shipmates' faces blur into family, or the beams above warp into forest branches. Nightmares are not just stories, but symptoms of survival, your body craving what it cannot have, your spirit fearing what it cannot control. On land, peasants dreamed too, often of food, warmth, or saints. But their nights, however restless, were spent in homes anchored firmly to the earth. Sailors dreamed with the sea beneath them, every groan of timber feeding their visions. They woke to motion, to draughts, to the reminder that the sea could claim them at any moment. Their dreams were not only coloured by hardship but intensified by it. Some sailors fought nightmares with ritual. A man might spit over his shoulder upon waking to banish the image. Another might refuse to speak of his dream until sunrise, believing words could make it real. Others sought to twist the omen into good fortune, convincing themselves that a drowning dream meant land was near, or that a ghostly figure meant a saint's blessing. Interpretation mattered as much as the dream itself, and in the close quarters of the hold, one man's vision could unsettle the whole crew. Now place yourself again in that half-sleep. You drift, then dream of walking across ice, the sea frozen solid beneath your feet. You hear cracks, see dark water yawning below, and suddenly you plunge. You wake with a start, breath ragged, cloak damp with sweat despite the cold. A comrade beside you stirs and mutters that he dreamed of wolves pacing the deck. Another swears he saw his dead father standing at the prow. The darkness hums with unease, as though the sea itself has crawled into their minds. The smell of sweat and mildew thickens, The creaks of wood echo like voices, and you realize how little separates nightmare from reality here. The hold itself feels dreamlike, shadows shifting with each flicker of lamplight. You rub your eyes, murmur a prayer, and lie back down, knowing the visions will come again. This is how sailors slept in winter, not just against the cold, the rats, and the stink, but against their own minds. Dreams became battlegrounds, places where fear, hunger, and longing clashed. Some nights they woke weeping, others laughing, still others silent and grim, but always, the dreams shaped the morning, whispered into the day's work, carried forward like warnings from the deep. You pull your cloak tighter, determined to endure another night. Whatever dreams come, you will face them, as you face the sea. For here, sleep is never simple rest, it is another voyage, taken in darkness, guided by forces no sailor can master. The nightmare fades, leaving only the steady groan of timbers and the damp cold pressed against your cheek. Around you, men stir, cough, and mutter in sleep, each caught in their own fragile battle with the night. You know this is the last stretch before dawn, that liminal hour when fatigue is deepest and hope feels most remote. And in this space, you begin to understand what sleep on a medieval ship truly meant. Not comfort, not peace, but endurance, a nightly trial that shaped body and soul alike. Chroniclers remind us that sailors often spoke of the sea itself as a thief. It stole warmth, stole food, stole rest. Yet within that theft lay resilience. Sleep was never long, never soft, yet somehow enough to keep men alive. The planks bruised them, the draughts froze them, the rats nipped them, but still they rose each morning to haul ropes and sing coarse songs. The sea took much, but it never took their will. One unusual testimony comes from a Spanish navigator who confessed that he had not known true rest in 20 years. And yet he wrote with pride that his body had grown so skilled at broken slumber that he could fall asleep in a storm and wake ready for duty. His words carry both misery and defiance, proof that even the harshest rhythms could be mastered. Researchers still debate whether sailors suffered long-term damage from such fragmented, brutal nights. Some argue their shortened lifespans reflected the toll, while others suggest seafarers adapted in ways modern minds cannot fathom. Perhaps both are true, lives worn down, but spirits forged strong. Imagine yourself one last time in the hold. You lie curled in your salt-crusted cloak, knees pressed to your chest, back aching from planks. Your breath rises as mist, mingling with the snores and whispers around you. The rats scurry, the bilge stinks, the cold gnaws, and yet you are still here. The ship creaks, and you sway with it, rocked like a child. For all the misery, you find yourself drifting into sleep once more, body yielding to exhaustion, mind surrendering to dream. And this is the truth. Sailors did not sleep as you do. They endured slumber, stole it, snatched it from the jaws of frost and fear. But in doing so, they proved the resilience of the human spirit. Their rest was hard, their nights brutal, yet their mornings came all the same. So now, let the timbers creak softly in your mind. The storm has passed. The coughs, the groans, the whispers of ghosts have faded into silence. The rats are gone, the bilge sweetened into nothing, and the cold no longer reaches your bones. You are left only with the rhythm of the sea, rocking you gently, as though the water has forgiven you at last. Breathe in slowly. Feel the weight of the cloak ease across your chest, not stiff with salt, but soft as wool. The planks beneath you smooth themselves into a bed, no longer biting, no longer cold. Around you, the voices of your shipmates grow distant, fading like echoes into the dark. You are alone now, but not afraid. The sea hums around you, not in menace, but in lullaby. Let your mind wander. Perhaps you picture a hearth glowing in the corner of a cottage, flames dancing gently. Or perhaps you see a summer deck, warm beneath the stars, gulls wheeling lazily overhead. Whichever dream you choose, let it carry you deeper into warmth, into safety. The sea cannot reach you here. The frost cannot bite. The waves cannot wake you. The bell cannot toll. You are free to sink, to drift, to surrender. Your breath slows, your eyelids grow heavy, and your body unwinds. Even the memory of hardship softens, becoming distant, unreal. So rest now. Let the voyage end. Let the ship rock you into peace. The night is no longer cruel, it is kind, it is endless, it is yours. And when dawn comes, it will not wake you. It will simply watch as you dream. Sweet dreams, traveler. May the sea carry you gently, far beyond the reach of storm and cold.